At the company meeting, my parents named my brother the heir. My father looked right through me and told a room full of executives that I had no head for business. I said nothing. I just sat at the far end of the table and watched my brother adjust his heavy gold watch, the one that always runs 5 minutes late. Then Grandpa, the founder, who still held the controlling shares, rose slowly from his wheelchair. "Actually," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "I have already chosen a successor." He was looking directly at me. Before I tell you how a quiet compliance coordinator ended up taking the throne of a New York financial empire, please hit like and subscribe to Jessica Told Stories. Drop a comment and tell me your age and where you are watching from. I love seeing the different generations and places our listeners tune in from. Now, let me take you back to that Tuesday afternoon, 50 floors above the gridlock of Midtown Manhattan, to the moment my family tried to erase me. The boardroom of Tran Capital Group smelled of expensive espresso lemon polish and old leather. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, the city looked like a scale model, a sprawling expanse of steel and ambition. Inside the room, the air conditioning hummed a low, steady drone beneath the sound of ice clinking against crystal. My father, Vincent Tran, stood at the head of the 20-foot mahogany table. He held a glass of 12-year-old scotch in one hand and rested the other on the back of his leather executive chair. 20 senior board members sat in rapt attention. Their tailored suits served as armor against the shifting tides of the financial market. I sat at the far end of the table, right near the catering doors. The invisible daughter. "Legacy," my father began. His voice carried the practiced, resonant cadence of a man who had spent 3 decades commanding rooms just like this one. Legacy is not just about holding on to what we have built. It is about knowing who has the hunger to take it further. The market does not reward hesitation. It rewards instinct. It rewards predators. He turned his gaze toward my older brother, Derek, who sat to his immediate right. Derek leaned back in his chair, a bespoke charcoal suit draping his shoulders, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Derek possesses the ruthless vision this firm requires to navigate the next decade. My father continued raising his glass slightly. "Effective immediately, he will assume the title of president. He is my designated heir. The future of Tran Capital belongs to him." Applause rippled through the room. Polite, synchronized, and calculated. Derek nodded, soaking in the validation like a sponge. He lifted his left arm to adjust his cuffs, giving the room a clear view of his heavy gold Rolex. It was an extravagant timepiece, a gift that cost more than my first car, yet it harbored a pathetic flaw. It constantly lagged. I watched from across the table as Derek tapped the crystal face twice with his index finger, forcing the second hand to sync up. He always cared more about the shine of the metal than the accuracy of the time. When the applause faded, a board member near the center cleared his throat, and Gwen, he asked, glancing in my direction, "Will she be taking on a new portfolio under the transition?" My father did not look at me. His eyes remained fixed on his scotch. "Gwen is essential to our daily operations," Vincent said. His tone shifted from warm pride to clinical detachment. "But she lacks the killer instinct required for executive leadership. She is better suited for background support. Simply put, she has no head for business. We rely on her to keep the paperwork filed." A few board members chuckled, soft, knowing laughs, the kind of laughter that tells you exactly where you stand in the hierarchy of their respect. I did not flinch. I kept my posture straight, my hands folded neatly over my legal pad. I pressed my thumbnail into the side of my index finger until it stung, using the sharp pain to keep my face entirely neutral. I let the humiliation wash over me, a familiar cold current I had learned to swim in for years. I did not defend myself. I did not speak. Derek shot me a brief, pitying look across the polished wood, his smirk widening. He opened his mouth to deliver what would undoubtedly be a patronizing speech of acceptance. He never got the chance. The heavy oak doors at my back clicked open. The sound was sharp enough to cut through the self-congratulatory atmosphere of the room. The board members froze. My father lowered his glass, his brow furrowing in irritation at the interruption. A nurse in crisp scrubs stepped through the doorway, pulling a wheelchair backward over the threshold. Seated in it was Theodore Tran, my 85-year-old grandfather, the founder of Tran Capital. He had not set foot in this building for over a year. The family narrative broadcasted to the world was that his mind had slipped, his health was failing, and he was enjoying a quiet, medically supervised retirement. Theodore gripped the armrests of the wheelchair. His knuckles went white. Before the nurse could stop him, he planted his silver-handled cane onto the carpet and pushed himself up. His legs trembled for a fraction of a second, but his spine straightened. He stood tall, casting a long shadow across the boardroom floor. The silence in the room was suffocating. You could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. "Dad," my father said. His voice faltered, the smooth executive facade cracking instantly. "What are you doing here? You should be resting." "I am resting, Vincent," Theodore rasped. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that commanded the room, just as it had 40 years ago. "I am resting on the knowledge that I never signed over my supervoting shares." My father lost all the color in his face. Derek stopped adjusting his watch, his hands freezing in midair. Theodore reached into the inner pocket of his tweed jacket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, tossing it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "I still hold 51% of the voting power in this room," Theodore said, his eyes scanning the terrified faces of the board before locking onto his son. "And actually, Vincent, I have already chosen a successor." He lifted his cane, the silver tip gleaming in the ambient light, and pointed it straight down the length of the table. To understand the suffocating silence in that boardroom, you have to understand the invisible scale my parents used to weigh their children. Let me take you back 3 years, to the moment I stepped onto the graduation stage at New York University. The heavy purple velvet of my academic gown clung to my shoulders in the humid May heat. I had just been named valedictorian of the Stern School of Business. I spent 4 years trading sleep for perfect grades, securing top internships, and mastering financial models that most seasoned brokers struggled to comprehend. When the dean called my name, I walked across the stage and looked out into the ocean of faces. I searched for my parents. I found my mother, Patricia, looking down at her glowing phone screen. My father was taking a business call. I swallowed the lump in my throat and gripped my diploma. I told myself their distraction did not matter. Tonight was the night they would finally see my worth. Tonight was the night I would officially join the family empire. We celebrated at a high-end steakhouse in the financial district. The restaurant smelled of charred bone and ribeyes, truffle oil, and aged Cabernet. My father ordered the most expensive cuts of meat and raised his glass to toast our success. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out 2 crisp cream-colored envelopes. He slid the first one across the white linen tablecloth to my brother. Derek had graduated a week earlier from a mid-tier state school. He barely scraped by with a 2.5 grade average. His primary achievements involved organizing fraternity mixers and avoiding academic probation. He tore open the envelope with casual indifference. "Welcome to the executive team," my father said, clapping a hand on Derek's shoulder. I watched my brother pull out a heavy contract. The bold ink at the top read, "Vice President of Acquisitions." Below that, his compensation package was laid out in undeniable clarity. A base salary of $350,000 a year, a generous performance bonus structure, and an executive housing stipend. I held my breath as my father slid the second envelope toward me. My hands shook slightly as I broke the wax seal. I unfolded the thick paper, my eyes scanning the text. Risk Compliance Coordinator. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked down at the compensation line. $75,000 a year. No bonus structure. No housing stipend. I looked up at my father, waiting for the punchline. There was none. He cut into a steak without looking at me. "You need to learn the ropes from the ground up," my father said between bites. "Compliance is safe. It requires attention to detail. Derek has a natural charisma for client acquisition. He is an investment in our growth. You will be our safety net." The message was clear. My brother was the prized asset. I was the overhead cost. $75,000 a year in Manhattan leaves you with barely enough to breathe. I moved into a cramped, noisy apartment in Queens. I shared a single bathroom with 3 other girls. My morning started at 4:30. I woke up to the rattling sound of the elevated train shaking my cheap window frames. I drank burnt, instant coffee and wore sensible, discounted blazers. I took the subway into the city, enduring the metallic screech of the tracks, and walked into the Tran Capitol Tower through the employee entrance. My desk was situated on the open floor, right next to the industrial printers. The air constantly smelled of ozone and hot paper. I spent my days drowning in compliance logs, reviewing hundreds of pages of risk assessments and ensuring the firm stayed within federal regulations. Derek lived a very different reality. The firm used his housing stipend to secure him a luxury loft in Tribeca. His apartment featured exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a wine fridge he never bothered to stock himself. He arrived at the office at 10 in the morning taking a private black car. He occupied a corner office with a sweeping view of the Hudson River. He spent his afternoons taking prospective clients to golf courses and exclusive lounges, leaving a trail of legal paperwork that I had to untangle. I gritted my teeth and worked 80-hour weeks. I thought my relentless dedication would eventually tip the scales. I thought they would realize my brain was the engine keeping the company out of federal scrutiny. Then came the second week of September. Our birthdays fall exactly 2 years and 3 days apart. My mother organized a joint dinner at an exclusive French bistro on the Upper East Side. The lighting was low and amber. My mother sat across from me, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, smelling of heavy floral perfume. After the waiter cleared our plates, Patricia reached into her designer tote bag. She pulled out a sleek black velvet box and handed it to Derek. "For our future leader," she said, her eyes shining with genuine adoration. Derek snapped the hinge open. Resting on a cushion of white satin was a heavy, 18-karat gold Rolex. He pulled it out, admiring the weight of it, and strapped it to his wrist. It was a $12,000 statement piece, a coronation gift. I sat still, keeping my hands folded in my lap, waiting for my turn. Patricia reached into her bag again. There was no velvet box for me. She pulled out a flat, rectangular shape wrapped in generic brown paper. She pushed it across the table. I peeled the paper back. It was a daily planner. The cover was made of stiff, faux leather, the exact kind you find in the discount bin of a pharmacy checkout aisle. On the back cover, a sticky residue marked the spot where a $20 price tag had been hastily scraped away. I stared at the cheap binding. I could feel the blood rushing to my ears. I looked at my mother. "I noticed your desk was looking cluttered the other day," Patricia said, taking a slow sip of her Pinot Noir. "This will help with your organization." I traced the faux leather with my thumb. I tried to force a smile, but my facial muscles refused to cooperate. "Not everyone is built for leadership, honey," Patricia continued, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Derek is a shark. You are just quiet. We all have our roles. It is better to accept where you shine instead of chasing things you cannot handle. I did not throw the planner back at her. I did not raise my voice. I sat in the dim light of that French bistro and thanked her for the gift. That night, on the rattling subway ride back to Queens, I held the $20 planner in my lap. I ran my fingers over the sticky residue on the back. I internalized their broken scale. I convinced myself that my mother was right. I was quiet. I was cautious. But I also believed that if I became entirely indispensable, if I logged every single detail and protected the firm from every possible threat, my father would eventually have to respect me. I took that cheap planner to my desk the next morning. I opened to the first page and started meticulously documenting every trade, every risk assessment, and every minor operation running through the server. I believed I was charting a map to the executive floor. I worked late into the night, poring over the trading algorithms my brother was supposedly managing. I just wanted to prove my worth. I did not realize my deep dive into the server logs would uncover a secret that could send my golden brother to federal prison. I spent the next 3 weeks cross-referencing server logs by hand. I sat under the flickering fluorescent light of my queen's bedroom, mapping out the architecture of Tran Capital's tech portfolio. My father trusted Derek to lead the high-frequency trading division. My brother liked to brag in the break room about his reckless market strategies, tossing around finance buzzwords to impress the junior analysts. But data does not care about charisma. Data only tells the truth. And the truth was terrifying. Derek was bleeding the firm dry. His trading algorithm was fundamentally flawed. He had set the risk parameters so loose that every market dip triggered a cascade of automated losses. We were down 7 figures in a single quarter, a silent hemorrhage hidden behind creative accounting and Derek's confident swagger. My brother was not a financial shark. He was a sinking ship, dragging the entire family legacy down with him. I stared at the red ink filling the pages of my cheap planner. A normal compliance coordinator would have filed a report, flagged the discrepancy, and let the chips fall. But I was not a normal coordinator. I was a Tran. I was desperate for my father to see me. I decided to fix it myself. I would build a corrective patch, a proprietary software architecture that anticipated market volatility and automatically hedged against Derek's blind spots. I would save the portfolio, present the solution to my father, and finally secure my seat at the executive table. For 4 months, my life shrank to a grueling cycle of survival. I worked my regular 10-hour compliance shift during the day, keeping my head down near the roaring printers. At night, I returned to my cramped apartment. My roommates complained about the glow of my monitors spilling beneath my bedroom door. I lived on cold instant ramen and metallic-tasting vending machine coffee. My eyes burned from staring at complex lines of quantitative code until 3 a.m. I poured every ounce of my stern education into that patch. It was elegant, predictive, and incredibly efficient. But because my background was in risk management, my mind always prepared for worst-case scenarios. I could not simply deploy a patch and walk away. I needed to know exactly how the code interacted with the main server. So I embedded a diagnostic backdoor. It was a secure, invisible gateway that fed real-time performance metrics directly to an encrypted folder on my personal drive. I built it for surveillance, a failsafe to ensure my brother's careless trades did not override my fixes. I had no idea that diagnostic backdoor would eventually become the key to dismantling his entire life. I deployed the code silently during a routine weekend server maintenance window. The bleeding stopped immediately. By Monday afternoon, the tech portfolio shifted from red to green. Derek strutted through the office, loud and triumphant, taking full credit for the market turnaround. I kept my mouth shut, quietly compiling the data for my upcoming presentation. But I was not the only person watching the numbers. Naomi found me in the break room on a rainy Thursday. She was a senior data scientist recruited from a top tech firm, wearing oversized glasses and a perpetually unimpressed expression. She did not care about office politics. She only cared about raw numbers. She walked up to the coffee machine, poured a cup of black decaf, and leaned against the counter. "Your syntax is very distinctive, Gwen," Naomi said, keeping her gaze fixed on her coffee cup. I froze the cardboard sleeve growing warm against my palm. I pretended not to understand. The patch on the primary trading node, she continued, lowering her voice so the nearby analyst could not hear. "It is brilliant work. Clean logic. But it does not match the sloppy code your brother usually pushes. I know you wrote it." My heart pounded against my ribs. "Please do not flag it," I whispered, stepping closer to her. "I am putting together a formal presentation for the board. I just need the data to prove it works before I show my father." Naomi turned to face me. Her dark eyes scanned my exhausted posture, the deep shadows under my eyes, the discounted blazer I wore. "You are building a safety net for a guy who would gladly push you off a bridge," she said. "He is going to take the credit, Gwen. Men like him never share the spotlight. He cannot take credit if I present the back-end architecture directly to the CEO," I argued, clinging to my naive hope. Naomi sighed, shaking her head slowly. "You cannot fix a poisoned well by pouring clean water into it. You are just giving them more to drink." She did not report me. Over the next few weeks, Naomi became my only reality check in a building constructed on illusions. We ate lunch together on the fire escape, watching the Manhattan traffic gridlock far below. She tried to warn me about the dangers of my blind loyalty, but my desire for my father's approval deafened me to logic. My blind loyalty faced another test that very weekend. Once a month, my mother required us to attend Sunday lunch at the sprawling family estate in Westchester. It was an elaborate display of wealth, featuring catered meals, crystal glasses, and forced conversation. I excused myself early from the dining room and walked out to the manicured back garden to escape the suffocating atmosphere. I found my grandfather Theodore sitting in his wheelchair near the edge of the pristine lawn. The family narrative broadcasted to the world was that his mind had faded after a stroke the previous year. My parents treated him like a fragile artifact, speaking to him in loud, slow syllables. I knew better. His body was frail, wrapped in a thick wool blanket despite the afternoon sun. But his eyes remained razor-sharp. He was staring intently at a towering ancient oak tree. I followed his gaze. A swarm of hornets was furiously building a large gray nest against the thick trunk. "They work fast," I said, standing beside his wheelchair. Theodore did not look away from the tree. "They are industrious," he rasped, his voice rough like dry leaves scraping across pavement. "But they do not belong there. They are burrowing into the bark, draining the sap." He slowly turned his head to look at me. His gaze felt heavy, piercing straight through the polite, quiet facade I wore around the family. "A parasite can only survive if the host lets it feed," he whispered. "You can prune the branches, Gwen. You can paint over the rot. But eventually, you have to burn the nest." I stared at the swarming insects. The metaphor was undeniable. My grandfather knew. He might have been confined to a wheelchair, stripped of his daily operational power by my father, but he saw exactly what was happening to his company. He saw Derek draining the resources, and he saw me quietly repairing the damage, letting the parasite feed. I should have listened to him. I should have recognized the danger of trying to save a structure that was inherently designed to crush me. Instead, I pushed the warning aside. I walked back into the estate and watched my brother laugh with my father over a glass of expensive wine. I reached into my tote bag and touched the cold faux leather edge of my cheap planner. The annual Tran Capital Charity Gala was only 2 weeks away. Held at the Plaza Hotel, it was the most important night of the fiscal year. 500 elite investors, politicians, and Wall Street power players would be in attendance. My father always used the keynote address to announce the firm's major innovations to the press and the financial elite. I spent my nights finalizing a pristine 70-page portfolio, detailing my algorithm, its predictive models, and the verified revenue it had generated over the past month. I planned to hand it directly to my father before his speech. I envisioned the moment his eyes would widen in realization. I pictured him shaking my hand, recognizing that I was the true heir to the intellect that built this empire. I believed the gala would be my coronation. I did not know I was marching toward my own execution. The annual Tran Capital Charity Gala at the Plaza Hotel was the single most important night of our fiscal calendar. It was a high society performance where New York finance royalty gathered to measure who was rising and who was sinking. I stepped through the ornate gilded doors, gripping a black leather portfolio. Inside that binder was every line of code, every predictive model, and every risk analysis proving my algorithm had saved the tech division from ruin. I wore a modest navy dress. It was simple, off the rack, and the best garment I could afford on my meager compliance salary. I had barely taken 3 steps onto the intricate floral carpet before my mother intercepted me. Patricia wore a custom emerald gown that caught the chandelier light with every movement she made. A heavy diamond collar rested against her skin, serving as a physical manifestation of the wealth my family commanded. "You are here," she noted. Her voice carried a tone of mild inconvenience rather than maternal warmth. She did not offer a hug or a polite smile. Her sharp eyes quickly assessed my plain dress and the heavy binder gripped tightly in my hands. "What on earth are you carrying, Gwen? This is a gala, not a board meeting. Hand that over to the coat check immediately." I gripped the leather tighter, my knuckles turning white. "I need to speak with Dad before his keynote address," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "It is critical regarding the tech portfolio." Patricia let out a short, breathy sigh. "Your father is currently entertaining the mayor," she said, placing a manicured hand firmly on my shoulder. "You will not disturb him. Come along now. I have found a place for you to sit." She steered me away from the center of the room. We bypassed the prime tables adorned with towering arrangements of white orchids, where senators, hedge fund managers, and industry titans sat deep in conversation. We kept walking until the plush carpet gave way to the scuffed hardwood near the service entrance. Table 34. It was situated directly beside the swinging kitchen doors. Every time a waiter rushed past with empty plates, I was hit with the harsh smell of industrial dish soap and searing meat, which overpowered the delicate scent of the floral centerpieces. Patricia patted my arm with practiced condescension. "The main tables are reserved for the real players tonight," she said smoothly. "We need to project strength and confidence to our investors. Just eat your dinner, smile if anyone happens to look your way, and stay out of the way." She turned and floated back toward the center of the room, leaving me behind. I sat alone for over an hour. My table mates were a mix of junior analysts who blatantly ignored me and random +1s who spent the entire evening scrolling silently on their phones. I kept my black leather portfolio resting on my lap, running my fingers over the binding, waiting for the speeches to begin. Eventually, the grand chandeliers dimmed. A single focused spotlight illuminated the main stage. My father stepped up to the clear acrylic podium. Vincent Tran was entirely in his element. He gripped the edges of the podium, projecting an aura of authority, commanding the attention of 500 elite guests without needing to say a single word. "We live in an era of unprecedented market volatility," my father began, his deep voice echoing perfectly through the silent ballroom. Most financial firms look at this landscape and see chaos. At Tran Capital, we see opportunity. We do not just weather the storm, we harness the lightning. A low murmur of approval rippled through the distinguished crowd. The third quarter tested the limits of the global tech sector. Vincent continued gesturing slightly with his right hand. Many of our closest competitors bled out on the trading floor. But our tech portfolio did not just survive the turbulence, it broke every internal revenue record we have on the books. And that kind of unprecedented growth does not happen by accident. It happens because of visionary leadership. My chest tightened. I sat up straighter in my chair, lifting my portfolio from my lap and placing it flat on the table. This was the moment. He was going to talk about the turnaround. He was going to acknowledge the engineering that saved his legacy. I imagined him calling me forward, recognizing my relentless grind. Tonight, I want to formally introduce the architect of our new era, my father said, extending his hand toward the side of the stage. The man who engineered a proprietary algorithmic defense that saved our quarter and redefined our future. My son. Our Vice President of Acquisitions, Derek Tran. The ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. Derek strolled onto the stage, beaming under the bright spotlight. He casually buttoned his bespoke suit jacket, raised a hand to acknowledge the cheering crowd, and stepped up to the microphone. The heavy gold watch on his wrist gleamed brightly in the stage lights. I stopped breathing. The air in my lungs turned to ash. "Thank you," Derek said, his voice slick with an artificial humility. When I looked at the market trends last month, I realized our traditional risk parameters were entirely too rigid. I knew I had to build something different, something predictive. So I sat down and coded a dynamic hedging architecture. He snapped his fingers, and a large digital screen behind him lit up. My eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. Projected onto the screen, magnified for 500 of the most powerful people in Manhattan to scrutinize, was my code. My exact syntax. The precise diagnostic backdoor loop I had written at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in my cramped Queens bedroom. I built this system to anticipate market dips before they even happen, Derek boasted, pointing directly at the lines of code on the screen. It reads the volatility and deploys countermeasures to protect our assets. It is clean logic. It is our new sword and shield. And it is entirely my own design. The applause swelled again, louder this time. Seasoned hedge fund managers nodded in deep respect. Wealthy investors raised their champagne glasses to toast my brother. He was standing on a brightly lit stage, soaking in the glory of my sleepless nights, my burned eyes, my sheer desperation to be seen. He did not just take the credit for the profits. He stole the very essence of my intellect and paraded it to the world as his own inherent genius. I pushed my chair back from table 34. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, but the harsh sound was drowned out by the cheering crowd. I stood up. I looked across the vast expanse of the ballroom, past the towering white orchids, past the clinking crystal glasses, directly toward the stage. My father was standing near the edge of the platform, proudly clapping for his son. As he turned his head to survey the room, his eyes swept over the back tables. For one fractured second, his gaze locked directly onto mine. He saw me standing stiffly by the kitchen doors. He saw the black leather portfolio resting unopened on my table. He knew. Naomi had been right all along. The code was too clean, too sophisticated for Derek to have ever written it on his own. My father was a brilliant veteran of the financial industry. He knew his son lacked the capacity to engineer a system that complex. He knew exactly whose brain had saved his company from ruin. I waited for a flicker of guilt to cross his face, a subtle nod of acknowledgement, anything to show he recognized the theft happening in front of him. Vincent Tran held my gaze for a single heartbeat. His expression remained entirely blank, devoid of any paternal warmth or ethical conflict. Then, with deliberate, calculated precision, he turned his back to me and continued clapping for his son. He chose the optics. He chose the golden boy over the truth. A physical wave of nausea crashed over me. The ornate ballroom started to spin. The clinking of glasses and the roaring applause morphed into a deafening, distorted buzz ringing in my ears. I could not stay in that room for another second. I abandoned the leather portfolio on the table, turned around, and pushed through the heavy side doors leading out to the hotel balcony. The cold October wind hit my face instantly, biting into my exposed skin. I gripped the ornate stone balustrade, leaning my full weight against it. I gasped for air, trying to force oxygen into my constricting lungs. My hands trembled against the cold stone, my vision blurred with unshed tears. The betrayal cut deeper than any minor insult or birthday snub they had ever thrown my way. They did not just view me as a liability anymore. They viewed me as a resource to be harvested and discarded without a second thought. A slow, rhythmic tapping sound broke through the rushing noise of the wind. Tap, step, tap, step. I turned my head. My grandfather Theodore moved slowly onto the balcony. He leaned heavily on his silver-handled cane, his breath puffing into small white clouds in the chill night air. He stopped a few feet away from me. He did not say a word at first. He reached into his tweed coat pocket, pulled out a neatly folded silk handkerchief, and held it out. I took it, pressing the soft fabric against my eyes, fighting desperately to compose myself. "They are cheering for a ghost," Theodore rasped, his voice barely rising above the wind. "They applaud a hollow vessel, entirely unaware of the mind that actually filled it." I stared down at the street lamps illuminating Central Park far below. "He knows," I whispered, my voice cracking under the weight of the realization. My father knows. Derek did not write that code. He knows it was me. Theodore stepped closer, leaning his weight onto the stone railing beside me. "Of course he knows, Gwen. But your father is a man who values the portrait more than the paint. A brilliant son secures the dynasty. A brilliant daughter just complicates the narrative." I gripped the silk handkerchief until my knuckles turned white. I saved them. I saved the portfolio. Theodore turned his head, his sharp, ancient eyes locking onto mine. He looked exactly like the man who had built a financial empire from nothing, stripped of the fragile facade he wore for the family. "I told you in the garden, Gwen. A parasite can only survive if the host lets it feed." He tapped his cane gently against the stone floor. "You thought your sacrifice would buy their respect. But in this family, sacrifice is just an invitation for more theft. You cannot negotiate with people who view your brilliance as their rightful property. You have to stop letting them feed." He did not offer a comforting hug. He did not offer empty platitudes. He simply turned around and slowly made his way back into the warmth of the ballroom, leaving me alone in the cold. I stood on that balcony for a long time. The freezing wind numbed my skin, but inside, a new kind of heat began to spread. The desperate, pleading girl who worked 80-hour weeks for a crumb of validation burned away. The daughter who accepted cheap daily planners and sat silently by the kitchen doors turned to ash. I looked through the glass doors. I watched Derek holding a glass of champagne, surrounded by admirers, laughing loudly as he accepted praise for my work. I watched my father smiling beside him, acting as the proud architect of a monumental lie. They thought I was weak, They thought I would stay quiet because I always had. They thought they could steal my mind and leave me in the shadows without consequence. I wiped my face with a silk handkerchief. I was done bleeding for people who enjoyed watching me bleed. I was going to find out exactly what else my brother was hiding behind his stolen success. And then I was going to burn the nest to the ground. The Monday morning following the gala felt entirely different from any other day of my life. I rode the subway from Queens into Manhattan, but I did not stare at the scuffed floorboards of the train car. I kept my head raised. The desperate need for my family to love me had burned away on that hotel balcony, leaving behind a cold, sharp clarity. I walked into the Tran Capitol Tower through the employee entrance, swiped my badge, and sat at my desk next to the roaring industrial printers. For the past 3 years, my morning routine consisted of manually reviewing my brother's trading logs, searching for his mistakes, and quietly fixing them before the opening bell. Today, I did nothing. I logged into the primary server, located the protective guardrails I had secretly placed around his accounts, and deleted them. If Derek wanted to be the visionary architect of the firm, he could navigate the market without his invisible safety net. But I did not stop there. I opened a secondary terminal and activated the diagnostic backdoor I had embedded deep within the proprietary algorithm. The backdoor was originally designed as a mirror. It allowed me to monitor the health of the code and track the inbound revenue without alerting the firm's cybersecurity team. When I pulled up the dashboard, the numbers flickered across my screen in bright green. The algorithm was performing flawlessly. It was anticipating market dips, hedging risks, and generating massive amounts of capital, just as I had engineered it to do. Yet, when I cross-referenced the gross profit generated by the algorithm against the actual liquidity sitting in the primary corporate accounts, the numbers did not match. There was a massive deficit. At first, I thought it was a simple ledger delay. High-frequency trades sometimes take 24 hours to settle across international markets. I refreshed the terminal. The deficit remained. I ran a manual diagnostic on the routing protocols. The money was not delayed. It was gone. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I bypassed the standard compliance gateways and dug into the raw, unfiltered transaction logs. What I found made the blood drain from my face. Derek had not just been making incompetent trades. He had been actively diverting the capital generated by my algorithm into a series of unauthorized offshore accounts. I tracked the outbound digital footprints. The money was moving in deliberate, staggered bursts of $500,000 to avoid triggering the automated federal banking alarms. The funds were bouncing through a labyrinth of shell companies stationed in the Cayman Islands. I traced the ultimate destination of the most recent wire transfer. It landed in the corporate account of a tech startup based in Palo Alto. I recognized the name of the startup immediately. It was a vaporware company founded by 2 men named Brad and Connor. They were Derek's former college roommates, his fraternity brothers. The same men who frequently occupied our VIP boxes at sporting events. Their startup had filed for preliminary bankruptcy protection 6 months ago. They had 0 viable products, no user base, and massive outstanding debts. Derek had illegally leveraged $20 million of Tran Capital core assets to bail out his drinking buddies. He was using the profits generated by my stolen algorithm to fund a sinking ship. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. This was no longer a matter of corporate incompetence or stolen credit. This was severe, premeditated embezzlement. It was wire fraud. If the Securities and Exchange Commission caught even a whisper of this discrepancy, they would raid the building. They would freeze every asset. Tran Capital would be dismantled. The board would face criminal charges, and hundreds of innocent employees would lose their pensions. My grandfather's entire legacy would be reduced to a cautionary tale in a federal indictment. I needed to secure the evidence. I reached for my mouse to download the transaction logs, but I stopped myself just in time. Tran Capital utilized a military-grade cybersecurity protocol. Every keystroke, every downloaded file, every USB drive insertion, and every cloud upload was strictly monitored by the IT department. If I attempted to extract $20 million worth of restricted financial data onto a digital drive, the system would instantly flag my terminal. Derek would be notified before I even finished the transfer. He would delete the offshore ledgers and claim I was attempting to steal corporate data. I could not save the evidence digitally. I had to take it offline. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the generic brown paper package my mother had given me for my birthday. I peeled back the wrapping and stared at the cheap faux leather daily planner. The sticky residue from the $20 price tag clung to the back cover. Patricia had given me this book to help me organize my trivial compliance tasks. She told me to accept my place in the background. I opened the planner to the first blank page, grabbed a fine point pen, and began to write. I did not write down summaries. I wrote down the exact hexadecimal decryption keys. I copied the offshore routing numbers digit by digit. I transcribed the IP addresses of the Cayman shell companies, the timestamps of the wire transfers, and the corresponding ledger discrepancies. My handwriting was tiny, meticulous, and cramped. I spent 4 hours transcribing the digital fraud into physical reality. My hand cramped painfully, the muscles spasming from the sheer volume of data I was copying, but I did not stop. The scent of hot ozone from the nearby printers masked the frantic pace of my breathing. Every time a shadow fell across my cubicle, I casually flipped a quarterly risk assessment report over the planner, pretending to review routine compliance metrics. When I finally finished copying the last offshore routing number, the faux leather book held the complete, undeniable roadmap to my brother's federal crimes. But handwritten notes were not enough to confront a CEO. I needed the raw, printed server logs to prove the numbers were real. I waited until the end of the day when the compliance floor was buzzing with the chaos of the closing bell. I gathered a stack of 300 routine risk assessment files that needed to be printed and archived. I initiated the massive print job, sending the mundane files to the heavy industrial printer beside my desk. As the machine roared to life, spitting out page after page of boring corporate data, I quickly tabbed over to the restricted transaction logs. I injected the print commands for the embezzled accounts directly into the middle of the massive print queue. I stood by the output tray, watching the pages pile up. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. If anyone walked by and glanced at the specific account numbers rolling off the toner drum, the entire operation would collapse. I carefully sifted through the towering stack of warm paper. I extracted the 40 pages of damning Cayman logs, hiding them beneath my plain blazer, and let the rest of the routine documents fall into the archive bin. I sat back down at my desk and pulled a thick red binder from my supply drawer. I placed the printed transaction logs inside the binder. I placed the cheap daily planner filled with the decryption keys into the front pocket. I snapped the metal rings shut. The binder felt incredibly heavy in my hands. It possessed a physical weight that mirrored the gravity of the secrets contained within its plastic covers. I stared at the red spine. This was the weapon that would burn the nest. I believed with absolute certainty that no father could ignore this level of destruction. Vincent Tran worshipped the firm above all else. He loved Derek, yes, but he loved power more. Once he saw the undeniable proof that his golden son was actively dismantling the empire and inviting a federal prison sentence, he would have no choice. He would have to fire Derek. He would have to strip him of his title, reclaim the stolen funds, and finally acknowledge that I was the only person capable of cleaning up the mess. I stood up from my desk. I smoothed the wrinkles from my discounted navy skirt. I picked up the red binder, holding it tightly against my chest, and walked toward the elevators. I pressed the button for the 51st floor. The executive level was quiet. The carpets were thicker up here, absorbing the sound of my sensible heels. The air smelled of fresh lilies and expensive cologne. I walked past the mahogany reception desk, ignoring the administrative assistant who tried to ask if I had an appointment. I marched directly to the towering double doors of the corner office. I did not hesitate. I raised my fist and knocked on the heavy wood. I waited for the command to enter, completely unaware that the man waiting on the other side of that door was willing to burn the entire world down just to protect his son. The heavy mahogany doors to the corner office swung open silently. My father sat behind a sprawling desk carved from a single slab of Italian marble. The room smelled of rich leather and the expensive cedar required to maintain his imported humidor. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, a kingdom he believed he ruled with flawless precision. I walked across the plush carpet, the thick fibers absorbing the sound of my sensible heels, and placed the red binder directly in the center of the marble slab. I did not offer a polite preamble. I simply told him to read the tabs marked in yellow. Vincent let out a tight breath of annoyance, putting down his gold fountain pen. He opened the plastic cover. For the first 2 minutes, the only sound in the room was the crisp turn of printed pages. I watched the blood slowly drain from his cheeks. The rigid, confident posture of a Wall Street titan began to collapse inward. His eyes darted across the handwritten decryption keys I had copied from the cheap daily planner. He saw the Cayman routing numbers. He saw the $20 million deficit. The undeniable proof of wire fraud sat right in front of him. I waited for the explosion. I braced myself for the roaring anger I assumed would be directed at the son who had jeopardized everything our family had built. Vincent closed the binder. The sharp snap of the metal rings echoed like a gunshot. He did not reach for his phone to call security. He did not summon Derek to demand an explanation. Instead, he lifted his head and aimed a glare so cold it felt physical. "Why are you spying on your brother?" he demanded. The question derailed my train of thought. I stood there blinking, trying to process the sheer absurdity of his reaction. "I am not spying," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I found a $20 million hole in the tech portfolio. Derek embezzled company funds to bail out his fraternity friends. This is a federal crime, Dad. If the Securities and Exchange Commission audits those accounts, the firm goes under." Vincent stood up, bracing his hands on the marble desk. His face flushed a dark, angry crimson. "Do you think I do not know how to manage my own firm?" he snapped, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Derek made a minor miscalculation. He is young. He takes risks. That is what leaders do. I will pull liquidity from the reserve fund to cover the deficit before the quarterly audit. You will delete whatever digital trails you created to find this, and you will never speak of this again." I stared at him. The man I had idolized, the brilliant financial strategist I had worked 80-hour weeks to impress, was evaporating right before my eyes. He was not a genius. He was just a father willing to commit felony fraud to protect a reckless son. Before I could formulate a response, the office doors swung open again. My mother floated into the room, carrying a stack of embossed invitations for an upcoming charity luncheon. Patricia wore a pristine white tailored suit, looking every inch the flawless society matriarch. She took one glance at my rigid posture and my father's flushed face, and her smile instantly vanished. "What is going on here?" she asked, stepping to my father's side. Vincent tapped the red binder. "Your daughter has decided to play corporate detective," he sneered. "She is trying to manufacture a scandal to ruin Derek." I turned to my mother, desperate for a shred of sanity. "Mom, Derek stole $20 million, I pleaded. He hid it in offshore shell companies. I have the proof right here. Patricia did not even look at the binder. She did not ask to see the numbers. She looked at me with an expression of profound disgust. "Why do you always try to destroy your brother?" she asked. Her words hit me harder than a physical strike. "You have always been jealous of him, Gwen," she continued, her voice dripping with venom. "From the day he got his first promotion, you sit in your little cubicle hoarding your bitterness, trying to tear down the son who actually brings glory to this family. Can you not just be a supportive sister for once?" The air left my lungs. I looked at my mother dripping in diamonds purchased with company money, and my father standing over a binder full of federal crimes. I had spent my entire adult life trying to balance a scale that was rigged from the start. I believed that if I was smart enough, loyal enough, and useful enough, they would finally love me. But sitting in that corner office, the truth crystallized with terrifying clarity. They did not care about the truth. They did not care about the law. They only cared about the illusion. The scale was never going to be fixed because they built it broken on purpose. They were willing to risk federal prison, willing to let the entire empire burn to the ground just to protect the golden image of their son. I did not scream. I did not cry. The desperate, seeking child inside me simply went quiet. A cold, precise calmness washed over my mind. I reached up and unclipped the plastic corporate ID badge from my lapel. I tossed it onto the marble desk. It landed right next to the red binder with a hollow clatter. "I quit," I said. The two words felt lighter than air. Vincent scoffed, crossing his arms. "You will be back by Monday," he mocked. "You have no savings, Gwen. You need this job." I did not bother arguing. I turned my back on the CEO of Tran Capital Group and walked out of the corner office. I walked past the reception desk, stepped into the elevator, and rode it down to the lobby for the last time. As I walked out through the revolving glass doors and onto the crowded Manhattan pavement, I felt a thrilling rush of total freedom. I needed time to disappear. I knew my father and brother possessed the resources to make my life miserable if they thought I posed a threat. I needed them complacent. I needed them arrogant. So I gave them exactly what they expected. The next morning, sitting in my cramped Queens apartment surrounded by cardboard moving boxes, I opened my laptop and logged into LinkedIn. I updated my professional profile, officially marking my departure from Tran Capital. I changed my status to actively seeking employment. Then I deliberately posted inquiries on public job boards for entry-level administrative assistant positions. I made sure to leave digital breadcrumbs indicating I was desperate, struggling, and aiming low. Through a mutual contact in the Human Resources Department, I learned the exact reaction my digital performance provoked. Derek had seen the update during a morning meeting. He laughed out loud, showing the screen to my father. They mocked my supposed downfall. They assumed I had surrendered, crushed by the weight of the real corporate world. They thought I was defeated, crawling back into the shadows where they always believed I belonged. Let them laugh, I thought, taping up the last cardboard box. Let them think the quiet daughter had finally learned her place. They had no idea I was packing my life into a rented sedan, preparing to leave the city to build an empire that would soon cast a shadow over everything they owned. I traded the suffocating concrete canyons of Manhattan for the towering pine trees of the Adirondack Mountains. 400 miles north of the city, the air tasted entirely different. It was crisp, sharp, and tasted of cedar instead of exhaust fumes. I signed a lease on a secluded, winterized cabin sitting on the edge of a pristine glacial lake. The property was completely isolated, surrounded by dense forests that absorbed all sound. For the first time in my life, the constant, demanding noise of my family vanished. In that profound silence, my mind finally had the space to expand. I did not take time to mourn the loss of my corporate identity. I went to work. I registered a brand new limited liability company under the name Apex Data. I operated in complete stealth mode. I deliberately left the Tran surname off every piece of registration paperwork, using my middle name to secure the commercial licenses. I transformed the rustic living room of the cabin into a high-tech command center. I installed heavy-duty server racks against the log walls and ran fiber optic cable straight through the floorboards. I did not need a sprawling skyscraper or a corner office to dominate the financial sector. I only needed my brain and an internet connection. My strategy was simple and ruthless. The major Manhattan firms ignored the mid-sized regional banks scattered across upstate New York and New England. Those institutions managed billions in collective assets, but operated on ancient, vulnerable compliance software. I targeted them directly. I drove my rented sedan to a regional banking headquarters in Albany for my first pitch. I did not wear a cheap, discounted skirt this time. I wore a tailored, slate gray suit purchased with the last of my savings. I sat across from a panel of skeptical bank executives and pulled out my laptop. I did not try to charm them with aggressive buzzwords or false promises. I simply ran a live diagnostic on their existing security protocols. In under 10 minutes, I exposed 3 massive vulnerabilities in their asset routing system that could have cost them their federal charter. The room went completely pale. Then I showed them the architecture I had designed to fix it. They signed a multi-year contract before I left the building. That single signature generated more revenue for my new company in one afternoon than my father had paid me in 3 years. Word of my localized success spread rapidly through the regional financial circuits. One bank recommended me to another, and then another. Apex Data became the phantom guardian of upstate finance. By my 5th month in the cabin, I was managing the compliance frameworks for 12 different financial institutions. The capital flowed into my newly minted corporate accounts in a steady, unstoppable river. I paid off my student loans in a single afternoon. I bought the cabin outright in cash. I stood on my wooden deck looking out over the freezing lake, holding a mug of black coffee, realizing I had built a multi-million-dollar empire using only the intellect my parents told me was useless. While I was building a fortress in the mountains, my brother was busy decorating a sinking ship. 200 miles south, Derek was spending a brisk Tuesday afternoon in the Hamptons. Through the quiet industry whispers of former colleagues, I learned exactly how my brother was celebrating his promotion. He was currently touring a custom 70-foot luxury yacht docked in Sag Harbor. He walked across the polished teakwood deck, swirling a glass of vintage champagne, barking orders at the marine broker about custom leather upholstery and imported marble countertops. He felt invincible. He believed he was a master of the universe. His breathtaking arrogance blinded him to the rapidly decaying architecture beneath his feet. Software is not magic. A complex algorithm requires constant maintenance, daily adjustments, and meticulous oversight to adapt to shifting market conditions. Without me sitting at that desk by the industrial printers, adjusting the predictive models in the dark, the stolen code was degrading. The aggressive risk parameters Derek loved so much were beginning to fracture. Tran Capital was quietly hemorrhaging money again. But that was not the worst of his problems. Derek assumed his offshore transfers to his fraternity friends were completely untraceable. He did not realize that consecutive, staggered wire transfers to the Cayman Islands automatically generate a suspicious activity report within the federal banking grid. An algorithm flags the pattern long before a human ever sees it. Deep within the bureaucratic labyrinth of Washington, an automated red flag had formally landed on the desk of a preliminary investigator at the Securities and Exchange Commission. A quiet, informal inquiry was officially brewing. Federal agents were beginning to request the early routing logs. Derek was standing on the bow of a multi-million-dollar yacht, toasting to his genius, completely oblivious to the federal crosshairs resting squarely on his back. The contrast was a beautiful, terrifying piece of dramatic irony. The golden child was dancing toward a federal indictment, while the invisible daughter sat safely in the mountains counting her millions. My peaceful isolation shattered on a Tuesday morning in late November. The first heavy snow of the season had dusted the pine trees in a brilliant coat of white. I was sitting at my kitchen island running a routine diagnostic for a client in Syracuse when the distinct heavy crunch of tires rolling over fresh gravel echoed through the silent woods. I paused my typing. I looked through the large bay window. A massive, sleek black Lincoln Town car pulled into my private driveway. The vehicle looked entirely out of place against the rustic backdrop of the Adirondacks. The engine cut off. The driver's side door opened, and a large man in a tailored dark suit stepped out, scanning the tree line. He walked around to the rear passenger door and pulled it open. I held my breath, instinctively reaching for my phone, expecting my father to step out and demand my return to fix his crumbling tech division. Instead, a familiar silver-handled cane emerged from the dark interior. My grandfather Theodore stepped out onto the snow-covered gravel. He was not wrapped in a thick wool blanket. He did not look fragile. He stood tall, the biting winter wind whipping at his heavy cashmere overcoat. He looked at the cabin, spotted me standing in the window, and offered a single sharp nod. I rushed to the front door, pulling it open as the freezing air rushed into the heated living room. "Grandpa?" I said, staring in shock as he easily climbed the 3 wooden steps to my porch without relying heavily on his cane. "How did you find me? And where is your nurse?" "I fired the nurse 6 months ago," Theodore said, his voice steady and devoid of the raspy weakness he projected at the family estate. "And finding you was simple, Gwen. I merely tracked the sudden, miraculous improvement in upstate banking security. I knew exactly whose signature was on that code." He stepped past me into the warmth of the cabin. He unbuttoned his overcoat, his sharp eyes instantly taking in the massive server racks, the multiple glowing monitors, and the intricate financial models displayed across my screens. A slow, genuine smile spread across his weathered face. "You built a fortress," he noted, running a hand over the polished wood of my kitchen island. "I always knew you had the intellect. I just needed to know if you had the spine to use it for yourself." I poured him a cup of hot tea, my hand shaking slightly. "I do not understand," I said, setting the porcelain cup in front of him. "You have been acting like your mind was failing for over a year. You let my father sideline you. You let him parade Derek around as the heir. Why did you not stop them? You still own the company." Theodore wrapped his weathered hands around the warm teacup. His expression hardened into a mask of pure, refined anger. "I suffered a minor stroke 14 months ago," he explained, his tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It was a physical setback, nothing more. My mind remained perfectly intact. But while I was sedated in the recovery ward, your father and your brother made their move." He took a slow sip of the tea, letting the bitter truth settle into the room. "They brought in a private physician, heavily compensated by the firm, to declare my cognitive functions compromised. They forged a medical power of attorney. They legally declared me incompetent, Gwen. My own son stripped me of my operational authority while I was sleeping in a hospital bed. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They stole the company from you." Theodore set the cup down. The clink of china against the wood was the loudest sound in the room. If I had fought them immediately, a biased judge would have looked at an 85-year-old man recovering from a stroke and sided with the vibrant, powerful current CEO. I was legally trapped in my own empire. I had to play the long game. I had to feign senility. I had to let them think they had won, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. He reached into the inner pocket of his cashmere coat. I watched you quietly save that tech portfolio, he continued, his eyes locking onto mine. I watched Derek steal your credit. I watched Vincent choose his own ego over your brilliance. But I could not intervene until I knew you were ready to stop playing the victim. Walking out of that corner office was the final test. You passed. Theodore pulled a thick, sealed manila envelope from his pocket and slid it across the kitchen island. It stopped right in front of my hands. What is this? I asked, staring at the heavy paper. The medical power of attorney only restricted my daily operational control. Theodore stated, a fierce, predatory light igniting in his eyes. It never revoked my ownership. I spent the last 3 months secretly meeting with a private federal judge to legally dissolve their fraudulent medical claim. My mind is officially certified sound, and my shares are officially weaponized. I reached out and opened the envelope. Inside was a dense legal document stamped with a gold notary seal. That is a proxy transfer, Theodore said. It grants you absolute voting control over my 51% stake in Tran Capital Group. I stared at my name printed in bold black ink. The power to dismantle the entire board rested lightly in my trembling hands. The annual shareholder meeting is this Friday, Theodore said, standing up and buttoning his overcoat. Vincent plans to officially transfer the CEO title to Derek and grant him executive immunity to protect him from the failing accounts. They think I am too weak to fight. They think you are too scared to return. He picked up his silver cane, walking toward the front door. He paused on the threshold, the harsh winter wind swirling snow around his expensive leather shoes. Show them they are wrong, Gwen. It is time to burn the nest. The skyline of Manhattan looks entirely different when you are no longer looking up from the gutter. I sat in the back of a private car as it glided across the Queensboro Bridge, watching the towering glass monoliths of the financial district pierce the low winter clouds. For 3 years, my commute consisted of standing shoulder to shoulder on a rattling subway car gripping a metal pole and dreading the moment I had to walk through the employee entrance of Tran Capital. Today, the leather seat beneath me was heated. The cabin was perfectly silent. I was returning to the city not as a discarded daughter, but as an apex predator circling her prey. I directed the driver to a luxury hotel overlooking Central Park. I bypassed the standard reception desk and took the private elevator to the penthouse suites. I paid for the room using an exclusive corporate card issued by my own firm. When I swiped the heavy key card and pushed open the double doors, I stepped into a sprawling sanctuary of imported marble, plush carpets, and floor-to-ceiling windows. I dropped my overnight bag onto a velvet armchair and walked to the glass. The city pulsed below me. I held the legal proxy transfer in my coat pocket, feeling the stiff parchment against my fingertips. My grandfather had given me the weapon. Now I needed the final ammunition. A sharp knock echoed through the quiet suite. I opened the door to find Naomi standing in the hallway. She wore a heavy trench coat and her signature oversized glasses clutching a sleek silver briefcase against her chest. She stepped inside quickly, casting a cautious glance down the corridor before I secured the deadbolt behind her. Naomi had been my only tether to sanity during those grueling months I spent covering my brother's tracks. She was a senior data scientist, a woman whose brilliance was consistently overshadowed by the loud, arrogant men dominating the executive floor. I walked her to the dining table, poured 2 glasses of sparkling water, and sat across from her. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She opened the briefcase and slid a heavy encrypted flash drive across the polished wood. "The final financial forensics," Naomi stated, her dark eyes reflecting the grim reality of the data. I pulled the routing logs right before the servers locked down for the weekend transition. "Derek is drowning, Gwen. The algorithm you abandoned is degrading faster than anyone predicted. He tried to manually adjust the predictive models on Tuesday and accidentally triggered a cascade failure. The tech portfolio lost another $4 million in 48 hours." I stared at the silver flash drive. Does my father know the extent of the current bleed? Naomi took a slow sip of her water. "Vincent knows the ship is taking on water, but Derek is lying to him about the size of the hole. Your father is convinced the upcoming executive immunity clause will shield them from any external fallout. They are banking on the board blindly approving the transition tomorrow morning. But that is not the worst part." She leaned forward, lowering her voice even though we were completely alone in a soundproof penthouse. "The Securities and Exchange Commission formally requested a preliminary audit of the Cayman routing numbers yesterday," she whispered. "The automated federal banking alarms finally caught the pattern. Subpoenas are going to drop by next week." A chilling thrill ran down my spine. The timing was razor thin. If the board voted Derek into the presidency tomorrow, the entire firm would be legally tethered to his federal crimes. "How did you manage to extract this data without tripping the internal cybersecurity alarms?" I asked, studying her face. "The IT department monitors every unauthorized download. You could face criminal charges just for handing me this drive." Naomi set her glass down. She looked at me with an expression that was part amusement and part profound respect. "I did not trip the alarms because I have master override clearance," Naomi said evenly. I frowned in confusion. "Only the chief technology officer and the founder hold that level of clearance." Naomi offered a slow, knowing smile. "Exactly." I sat back in my chair as the pieces rapidly clicked into place. I replayed every interaction I ever had with her. The way she conveniently found me in the break room when I deployed the secret patch. The way she always possessed perfect knowledge of Derek's sloppy code. The way she warned me about the poisoned well. You do not just work for the data department. I breathed, the realization washing over me. Naomi adjusted her glasses. 3 years ago, when I applied to Tran Capital, your father tossed my resume into the rejection pile because I did not graduate from an Ivy League boys' club. Your grandfather pulled my file out of the trash. Theodore personally funded my hiring bonus. He recognized my talent when Vincent only saw my background. When your father and brother forged that medical power of attorney and locked Theodore out of the operational network, he needed eyes on the inside. He needed someone who could bypass their security and feed him the real numbers. She tapped the silver flash drive. I was planted there to spy on the men ruining his legacy, Naomi continued. And I was planted there to watch you. Theodore needed to know if you were going to be a victim forever or if you had the spine to become a queen. He told me to let you struggle. He said the only way you would ever learn to fight was if you were pushed to the absolute edge of the cliff. A profound sense of awe settled over me. My grandfather had orchestrated an invisible safety net while pretending to be a frail, broken man. He had surrounded me with silent allies, waiting patiently for me to wake up. Before I could thank her, my cell phone vibrated violently against the table. The caller identification illuminated the screen. It was Patricia. My mother had not called me since the day I quit. She had not checked to see if I was starving, homeless, or struggling. Now, less than 24 hours before the most critical board meeting in company history, she was reaching out. I met Naomi's gaze. She gave me a single encouraging nod. I answered the call and placed the phone on speaker. "Gwen, darling," Patricia chimed. Her voice was dripping with that artificial high society sweetness she reserved for charity luncheons and forced family gatherings. "Hello, Mother," I replied, keeping my tone entirely neutral. "I know we left things on a rather tense note a few months ago." She continued sighing dramatically, as if I had been a stubborn teenager throwing a tantrum. "But your father and I have been talking. We are willing to let bygones be bygones. Tomorrow is a very big day for our family. Derek is officially ascending to the presidency. The press will be in the lobby. The board expects a united front." She paused, waiting for me to express gratitude for her sudden benevolence. When I offered only silence, she pressed forward. "We want you there, Gwen. In the visitor gallery, of course. It is important for the optics. And your father agreed that if you show up and behave, we might be able to find a nice administrative role for you back in the compliance department. A fresh start. Does that not sound lovely?" I stared at the encrypted flash drive resting on the table. It contained the exact federal crimes her precious son was currently hiding. I thought about the cheap daily planner she had handed me in that dimly lit bistro. I thought about the years I spent making myself small just to fit into the tiny box she built for me. She was dangling a low-level desk job like it was a life raft, completely oblivious to the fact that I was already commanding a fleet of battleships. I did not scream at her. I did not hurl insults or threaten her perfect social image. The anger that used to consume me had frozen into a cold, precise calmness. "I appreciate the invitation," I said smoothly. "I will be there, Mother." Wonderful Patricia beamed, the relief evident in her tone. "Wear something appropriate, dear. Try not to blend into the curtains this time." She ended the call. The dial tone echoed through the penthouse suite. Naomi picked up her briefcase and stood. "They have no idea what is coming," she said, walking toward the door. "I will see you in the boardroom," I replied. The next morning, the sun rose over Manhattan, casting a brilliant golden light across the frost-covered skyscrapers. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the penthouse suite. I was no longer the exhausted girl wearing a discounted navy skirt and sensible shoes. I wore a bespoke, tailored designer suit in a striking shade of midnight blue. The cut was sharp, structured, and entirely unapologetic. I slipped on a pair of designer heels that clicked with authority against the marble floor. I picked up the leather portfolio containing the proxy transfer and the printed decryption keys. I looked at my reflection one last time. The invisible daughter was dead. The parasitic wasp nest had been allowed to fester for far too long. I walked out of the hotel suite ready to strike the match. I stepped out of the private elevator, and the familiar scent of lemon polish and roasted espresso washed over me. The 50th floor of the Tran Capitol building always felt less like a functional workspace and more like a cathedral dedicated to wealth. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, casting long, sharp shadows across the imported carpets. For 3 years, I had walked these halls with my head down, terrified of drawing attention, hoping my relentless work ethic would speak for itself. Today, I walked with my spine straight, my midnight blue tailored suit serving as armor against the ghosts of my past. I pushed through the heavy mahogany doors of the main boardroom and took my seat at the far end of the 20-foot table right by the catering entrance. It was the exact chair I had occupied during countless meetings, the designated spot for the invisible daughter. The room buzzed with the low, confident murmurs of 20 senior partners. They wore bespoke suits and sipped sparkling water, their briefcases resting near their polished leather shoes. They had no idea they were sitting on top of a digital powder keg. To my left, seated in the plush velvet chairs of the visitor gallery, was my sister-in-law, Madison. She was a lifestyle influencer who treated the financial district like her personal shopping runway. She had met my brother at a charity auction 4 years ago, drawn instantly to the prestige of the Tran surname. Today, she wore a pristine ivory dress, her blonde hair styled in effortless waves. A thick diamond tennis bracelet caught the fluorescent light every time she shifted her posture. She held her phone at a subtle angle, silently recording the room for her thousands of followers, eager to broadcast her husband ascending to the throne. Madison caught my eye and offered a tight, patronizing smile. She likely assumed I was there to beg for my old cubicle job, crawling back after my supposed failure in the real world. She did not know about the Cayman shell companies. She did not know her designer wardrobe, her upcoming Hamptons yacht, and her flawless social media aesthetic were currently financed by federal wire fraud. Her entire pristine reality was an illusion, funded by stolen money, and she was blissfully unaware that it was all about to evaporate. I gave her a polite nod in return, keeping my expression entirely neutral. At the head of the long table, my father, Vincent Tran, cleared his throat. The low murmurs of the board members ceased instantly. He poured his 12-year-old scotch, the ice clinking softly against the crystal, and rested his hand on the back of his executive chair. Legacy, my father began, his deep voice carrying the practiced rhythm of a man who believed his own fictions. He looked around the room, making deliberate eye contact with the most influential partners. He spent the next 15 minutes weaving an elaborate, captivating fairy tale about the third quarter. He signaled to the junior associate manning the projector, and a series of brilliant green charts illuminated the screen behind him. The numbers displayed on that screen were a masterpiece of creative accounting. Vincent pointed to a soaring graph attributing the miraculous upward trends in our tech sector to Derek and his supposed market instincts. He spoke of aggressive expansion, visionary risk management, and a new era of unprecedented profitability. Sitting there at the back of the room, I felt a distinct icy chill radiate through my chest. I knew those numbers were entirely fabricated. The real data, currently sitting encrypted on the flash drive in my pocket, showed a hemorrhaging portfolio. Derek had tried to manually adjust the predictive models I left behind, and he had triggered a cascade failure. The firm was bleeding millions. Vincent was standing in front of 20 seasoned financial veterans, selling them a burning building and convincing them it was just ambient heating. The board members nodded in unison, their eyes reflecting the green glow of the projector. They were old money investors, men who understood relationships and leverage, but who severely lacked a fundamental understanding of algorithmic trading. They did not question the complex back-end logic. They only saw profits, and they were eager to applaud the son of the founder who was supposedly delivering them. Vincent transitioned to the core agenda of the morning. It was time to formally transfer the Chief Executive Officer title, but there was a specific critical clause attached to this promotion, one that made my blood run cold. Vincent proposed granting Derek full executive immunity for all prior trading strategies implemented during the current fiscal year. He framed the clause as a standard protective measure, citing turbulent regulatory environments and the need for bold leadership without the constant fear of internal reprisal. It was a brilliant, terrifying legal maneuver. Vincent knew the offshore accounts were leaking. He knew the Securities and Exchange Commission was beginning to circle. He wanted the board to rubber stamp a shield that would insulate his son from prosecution. By voting for the immunity clause, the board members would inadvertently assume shared liability for the fraudulent trades. Vincent was tricking his most loyal partners into standing on the tracks, ensuring they would take the hit when the federal train finally arrived. They were voting to protect the Golden Boy at the cost of their own pensions and freedom. Derek stood up to accept the nomination. He smoothed the lapels of his charcoal suit, radiating a smug, unearned confidence. He lifted his left arm to adjust his cuffs, revealing the heavy gold Rolex our mother had gifted him. The second hand ticked erratically, still lagging behind actual time, a persistent mechanical failure he refused to acknowledge. He shot a confident, arrogant wink toward Madison in the gallery. She beamed, adjusting her diamond bracelet, her phone still recording his triumphant moment. The 20 board members raised their hands in unison. It was a flock of tailored suits eager to please the reigning monarch, blind to the slaughterhouse waiting just beyond the doors. The tension in the room tightened around my chest, thick and suffocating. The air felt heavy, charged with the impending weight of a ruined dynasty. I kept my hand resting in my lap, my fingers brushing against the edge of the silver flash drive hidden in my pocket. Vincent looked across the sea of raised hands, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. He had orchestrated the perfect succession. He had buried the truth, silenced the difficult daughter, and secured the crown for his chosen heir. "If there are no objections," my father announced, his voice echoing in the quiet sunlit room, "the motion carries." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors at my back swung open. The heavy oak doors at the back of the room swung open with a resounding thud that echoed off the glass walls. The sudden noise shattered the manufactured harmony of the boardroom. 20 senior partners turned in their leather chairs, hands still raised in midair, their tailored suits rustling in unison. My grandfather, Theodore Tran, crossed the threshold. He was not pushed by the timid medical aides my father usually employed. Instead, his longtime personal driver, a towering man named Marcus, guided the wheelchair forward. Theodore did not look like the frail, fading patriarch my family had spent the last 14 months describing to the financial press. He wore a crisp charcoal suit, a crimson silk tie, and an expression of pure, unyielding authority. Vincent lowered his hand. The triumphant smile vanished from his face, replaced by a tight, practiced mask of concern. He stepped away from the acrylic podium, walking toward the center of the room. "Dad," Vincent said, his voice dripping with artificial warmth. "What a pleasant surprise. We were just concluding the quarterly transition. You should be resting at the estate. The drive into the city is too taxing for your condition." Vincent gestured toward Marcus, a subtle signal to turn the wheelchair around and escort the old man out of sight. Marcus did not move an inch. Theodore gripped the armrests of his chair. He planted his silver-handled cane onto the thick carpet and pushed himself upward. A collective gasp rippled through the visitor gallery. My grandfather stood tall, his spine perfectly straight, casting a long shadow across the polished mahogany table. He locked eyes with his son. "I am not here to rest," Vincent Theodore said. His voice was a low rumble, devoid of the raspy weakness he used during Sunday family dinners. "I am here to halt a fraudulent vote." The air in the room turned frigid. Several board members lowered their hands, exchanging nervous glances. Derek jumped up from his seat, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Grandpa Derek interjected, adopting a soothing, patronizing tone. "You are confused. The doctor said these episodes might happen. Let us get you a glass of water and call your physician." Theodore ignored his grandson entirely. He kept his piercing gaze fixed on Vincent. My father cleared his throat, addressing the confused executives. "Gentlemen, I apologize for this interruption. As you know, my father suffered a stroke last year. His medical power of attorney was enacted for his own protection. His cognitive functions have been slipping. We will reconvene after I ensure he receives proper medical care." It was a blatant lie. Vincent was using a forged health crisis to silence the only man in the room with more authority than him. "You can drop the charade," Theodore snapped. His words sliced through the room like a scalpel. "You bribed a private physician to sign that medical directive while I was unconscious in a recovery ward. You locked me out of my own operational network because you thought my mind was gone. You thought I was too weak to realize you were destroying my legacy. Vincent stepped back, his confident facade fracturing. Dad, you are making a scene in front of our investors. You do not have the legal authority to disrupt a scheduled executive vote. The medical directive stripped your operational privileges. Theodore reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a thick, sealed manila envelope and dropped it onto the table. The heavy paper slid across the polished wood, stopping directly in front of the lead corporate counsel. "Open it," Theodore instructed the lawyer. The room watched in breathless silence as the attorney broke the seal and extracted a dense stack of legal documents. He scanned the first page, his eyes widening behind his wire-rimmed glasses. He flipped to the second page, tracing the gold notary seal with his index finger. "Well," Theodore prompted, "read the first clause aloud for my son." The attorney swallowed hard, his voice trembling slightly. "This is a federal injunction," he stammered, looking up at Vincent. "It formally dissolves the previous medical power of attorney certified by 3 independent federal judges, and attached is a proxy transfer. Theodore Tran retains his full 51% voting share." Vincent stared at the documents, his jaw slack. The kingdom he had spent 3 years stealing was evaporating in front of his eyes. "I hold the majority stake in this room," Theodore declared, leaning his weight onto his silver cane. "And I formally vote no on the motion to promote Derek Tran. I also vote no on granting him any form of executive immunity." Derek slammed his palms onto the table. The heavy gold watch on his wrist slid down his forearm, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "You cannot do this," he yelled, his voice cracking, shedding the smooth executive persona he had worn all morning. "I built the new hedging architecture. I saved the tech portfolio. I am the only reason this firm survived the 3rd quarter." "You did not build anything," Theodore countered, his tone dripping with refined disgust. "You are a parasite feeding off a host. You stole the algorithm from your sister, paraded it at the Plaza Hotel, and used the resulting profits to fund your own illegal ventures." Derek turned a deep, blotchy purple. He pointed a trembling finger in my direction. "Her!" he spat, venom lacing every syllable. "You are stopping my promotion for her. She is a glorified compliance secretary. She sits in a cubicle and files risk reports. She could not handle the pressure of closing a single deal. She is weak." I remained seated at the back of the room, my expression calm. I let my brother dig his own grave in front of the very people he needed to impress. "She is weak," Theodore repeated, a cold smile touching the corners of his mouth. "My son and my grandson have spent the last 3 years driving this financial institution toward a federal indictment. You engineered a $20 million deficit. You forged reports. You lied to the men sitting at this table." The board members gasped, a frantic wave of whispering washing over the room. The executives realized the fabricated profits on the projector screen were hiding a catastrophic reality. While you two were busy committing wire fraud, Theodore continued turning his body so the entire room could hear him clearly. "My granddaughter packed her bags, moved to the Adirondacks, and quietly built a boutique risk management firm from scratch. Without a single dollar of family money, she secured the compliance contracts for 12 regional banks. She built a $10 million empire in stealth mode, while you were shopping for yachts in the Hamptons." Vincent looked at me, genuine shock washing over his features. Madison, sitting in the visitor gallery, lowered her phone, her eyes darting frantically between her husband and the man dismantling him. "I am exercising my right as the majority shareholder to appoint an emergency successor," Theodore announced, his voice ringing with finality. I yield the floor to the new Chief Executive Officer of Tran Capital Group. Every head in the room turned toward the catering doors. 20 elite financial partners stared at the invisible daughter they had ignored all morning. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the lapels of my midnight blue tailored suit. I did not rush. I walked the full length of the mahogany table, my designer heels clicking a steady, authoritative rhythm against the hardwood floor. I passed my father, who stood frozen near the podium. I passed my brother, whose face was contorted in panicked rage. I stopped right next to the acrylic stand, taking the space my father had occupied just moments before. I reached into my pocket and retrieved the encrypted silver flash drive Naomi had given me. I picked up the connection cable resting on the podium and plugged my tablet directly into the primary boardroom projector. The fabricated green charts on the large screen vanished, replaced by a stark black background. I tapped the screen once, preparing to show the room exactly what was hiding in the dark. The enormous digital screen behind me hummed to life. The glowing white canvas illuminated the faces of the 20 executives sitting around the long mahogany table. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the generic brown daily planner my mother had given me for my birthday. The sticky residue on the back cover caught the harsh glare of the projector light. I placed the cheap faux leather book on the pristine glass podium. My brother let out a short, forced laugh, attempting to project confidence, but his eyes darted nervously toward the exit. I opened the planner to the first page. The executives leaned forward, squinting at the small, cramped handwriting filling the lined paper. I did not waste time addressing Derek or his fragile ego. I spoke directly to the men who controlled the capital. 30 minutes ago, the current chief executive officer told you this firm survived the third quarter due to a new dynamic hedging architecture I began, keeping my voice steady and resonant. He claimed the vice president of acquisitions engineered that system. That is a fabricated narrative designed to conceal a catastrophic financial liability. I typed a quick command into my tablet. The screen shifted, displaying thousands of lines of dense quantitative source code. This is the core syntax of the proprietary algorithm currently managing our tech portfolio, I explained, dragging a laser pointer across the illuminated text. If my brother truly built this architecture, he should be able to explain the recursive loop functioning on line 412. I turned to look at Derek. The confident smirk had melted off his face, leaving behind a pale, slick sheen of sweat. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. He did not even know what a recursive loop was. He cannot explain it because he did not write a single line of that code, I stated, turning back to the board. I engineered this system in my apartment over 4 months. I deployed it to stop a 7-figure bleed caused by his reckless market strategies. And because my background is in risk management, I embedded a diagnostic backdoor deep within the framework to monitor the automated trades. A silver-haired managing director near the center of the table frowned, folding his hands. Stolen intellectual property is a serious accusation, Ms. Tran, he said, his tone thick with skepticism. But internal credit disputes do not warrant halting an executive transition. The portfolio is still generating profit. That is all the board cares about. I offered a slow, grim smile. I tapped the screen again. The source code vanished, replaced by a live portal connecting directly to the restricted corporate transaction servers. You are operating under the assumption that those profits actually exist, I replied. I looked down at the handwritten notes in my $20 planner. I began typing a sequence of complex hexadecimal decryption keys into the terminal. The mechanical clatter of my keyboard echoed through the silent room. With every keystroke, the illusion my father had meticulously constructed began to fracture. This diagnostic backdoor did not just monitor market fluctuations, I told the executives. It tracked the exact destination of every single dollar generated by my algorithm. When I cross-referenced the inbound revenue against our primary corporate accounts, I found a hole. I hit the enter key. The screen flashed red. A sprawling spreadsheet materialized, detailing dozens of outbound wire transfers. The numbers were staggering. Derek did not use the algorithm to save Tran Capital. I continued, my voice echoing off the glass walls. He used it to quietly funnel $20 million out of our core assets. He staggered the transfers in increments of $500,000 to bypass our internal banking alarms. The room erupted in a chaotic chorus of gasps and scraping chairs. Several partners stood up, pointing at the screen. The sheer scale of the theft was undeniable. The digital footprints were displayed in bright, unforgiving detail. I scrolled down, revealing the final destination of the diverted funds. He routed the capital through a labyrinth of shell companies stationed in the Cayman Islands, I explained, highlighting the offshore routing numbers. The ultimate beneficiary is a failing tech startup based in Palo Alto, a vaporware company owned by two of his former college roommates. He drained your pensions and your equity to bail out his fraternity friends. The silver-haired managing director collapsed back into his leather chair, rubbing his temples in horror. The other executives began shouting over one another, demanding answers from my father. They realized their own stock options, their pristine reputations, and their personal freedom were now legally tethered to a federal crime. If a Securities and Exchange Commission subpoenaed those records, every man at that table would be implicated in wire fraud. Vincent stood frozen behind his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the leather. He stared at the projector screen, his jaw rigid, realizing the depth of the disaster he had tried to cover up. He had known about the deficit, but seeing the raw, unedited routing logs displayed for his most powerful partners shattered any hope of containment. Derek snapped. The polished veneer of the golden sun shattered entirely. "That is a lie," he screamed, his voice pitching into a hysterical octave. He pushed his chair back with such force it tipped over and crashed onto the floor. He lunged across the mahogany table, his expensive dress shoes scrambling for traction. She fabricated the data. She altered the logs to frame me because she is jealous. He reached for the podium, his hand outstretched, desperate to smash the tablet and plunge the room back into darkness. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, watching him flail like a trapped animal. Before Derek could reach the glass stand, a figure emerged from the visitor seating area. Naomi strode purposefully toward the center of the boardroom. She carried the sleek silver briefcase she had brought to my hotel suite the previous night. She did not raise her voice or engage in the screaming match. She simply unlatched the metal clasps and let the lid fall open. She reached inside and pulled out thick, heavy stacks of physical paper. "These are the notarized hard copy bank statements from the Cayman shell companies," Naomi announced, her clear voice slicing through the chaos. She tossed the first stack onto the polished wood. The heavy thud commanded instant attention. I extracted them directly from the primary server archives using founder-level security clearance. She walked around the table, dropping a pristine bundle of evidence in front of every single executive. "Digital logs can be manipulated," Naomi continued, handing the final stack to the silver-haired managing director. "But these physical records contain certified routing signatures from the receiving banks. The fraud is real. The money is gone, and the federal inquiry has already begun." The board members scrambled to read the documents. The rustling of paper filled the room, accompanied by low, terrified mutters. The executives traced the printed routing numbers with their own fingers, comparing them to the data glowing on the projector screen. The numbers matched perfectly. There was no room for denial. There was no legal loophole left to exploit. Derek froze mid-lunge, his arm still resting on the polished wood. He looked at the printed statements scattered across the table, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. He turned his panicked gaze toward our father, silently begging the patriarch to perform a miracle and fix the catastrophe. But Vincent had nothing left to offer. The powerful chief executive officer looked small, defeated, and entirely out of options. The empire he valued above his own daughter was crumbling into dust around his expensive Italian leather shoes. I closed my $20 daily planner and slipped it back into my blazer pocket. I stepped away from the podium and walked slowly toward the head of the table. The executives parted to let me through, their eyes wide with a newfound profound respect. They were no longer looking at an invisible compliance coordinator. They were looking at the only person in the building who understood the architecture of their survival. I stopped a few feet away from my father. He looked up at me, his face drawn and hollow. He tried to speak, perhaps to offer a desperate excuse or invoke the hollow bonds of our shared bloodline, but no words came out. I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. I did not feel the crushing need for his validation anymore. I only felt the cold, undeniable truth of my own capability. "I am not here to steal my brother's throne," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the ruined boardroom. "I am here to repossess the company he stole from our grandfather." I turned my back on Vincent Tran and looked out over the sea of terrified executives ready to dictate the terms of their surrender. Madison sat frozen in the plush, velvet chair of the visitor gallery. Her phone, which moments ago had been carefully angled to capture her husband in his glorious ascent to power, slipped from her manicured fingers. The device landed softly on the thick carpet, the screen going dark. For her entire adult life, my sister-in-law had traded exclusively on perception. She had built a massive online following by projecting an existence of effortless, untouched luxury. Her digital footprint was a carefully curated highlight reel of vintage champagne, front-row Fashion Week tickets, and the upcoming custom yacht docked in Sag Harbor. She truly believed she had married into an untouchable New York dynasty. Looking at the notarized Cayman bank statements scattered across the mahogany table, the terrifying reality pierced her perfectly curated bubble. Derek did not possess a trust fund insulated from consequences. He did not possess a brilliant financial mind. He was a common thief standing in a bespoke suit. The luxury Tribeca loft and the heavy diamond tennis bracelet resting on her wrist were suddenly transformed from symbols of elite status into physical evidence of a federal crime. If she stayed by his side, the Securities and Exchange Commission would freeze her personal bank accounts. They would seize her assets. The federal government would dissect her glamorous lifestyle on public television, exposing the rot beneath the expensive veneer. Madison stood up. Her movements were rigid, entirely stripped of their usual fluid, practiced grace. Derek turned his panicked gaze toward the gallery, his eyes silently pleading for a lifeline from the woman who was supposed to be his partner. He reached out a trembling hand across the table, his confident posture completely shattered. "Madison," he whispered, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of the room. "Baby, do not listen to them. I can fix this. I can explain the strategy." She did not respond to his frantic pleading. She looked at the man she thought she knew, seeing the pathetic, hollow reality underneath the expensive charcoal fabric. Without saying a single word in his defense, Madison reached for her left hand. She grasped the 4-carat diamond engagement ring that had sparkled in hundreds of her social media posts. She pulled the massive stone over her knuckle. She walked slowly to the edge of the massive boardroom table and dropped the heavy platinum band onto the polished wood. The ring hit the surface with a sharp, stinging clatter that cut through the low murmurs of the stunned room. It rolled for a few inches before coming to a dead stop right next to one of the printed wire transfer logs. Madison turned her back on my brother. She walked out of the glass doors without casting a single backward glance, leaving the absolute ruins of her marriage resting on the table. The sharp sound of the diamond hitting the wood acted as a starting pistol for the 20 executives in the room. The initial shock paralyzing the board members evaporated, instantly replaced by the ruthless, predatory survival instincts that govern high finance. These men did not achieve their powerful positions by displaying blind loyalty to a sinking ship. They survived by knowing exactly when to cut the anchor. The silver-haired managing director, the same man who had clapped the loudest for Derek just 20 minutes earlier, stood up and slammed his fist onto the table. "Vincent," he roared, his face flushed with unadulterated fury. "You sat in that chair and lied directly to our faces. You tried to trick us into voting for an executive immunity clause that would have made every single person in this room a legal accessory to wire fraud." Vincent raised his hands in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Gentlemen, please," he stammered, his deep, resonant voice failing him completely. "This is an internal family dispute. The data presented here is taken completely out of context. We can manage this exposure internally. We just need to keep the narrative contained until I can liquidate a few private assets." "There is no containment!" another senior partner shouted from across the room, aggressively waving the hard copy bank logs in the air. "The federal banking alarms have already tripped. The regulatory subpoenas are coming. I am not going to a federal penitentiary because your arrogant son wanted to play venture capitalist with our pension funds." The pristine, quiet cathedral of wealth transformed into a loud, frantic war room. Men who had spent decades cultivating an aura of refined, untouchable power were now sweating visibly through their expensive dress shirts. They pulled out their mobile phones, frantically dialing their personal legal counsels and crisis management teams. The carefully curated, perfect image of the Tran family spectacularly disintegrated in front of New York elite financial players. The silver-haired director raised his voice above the shouting, demanding order. "I propose an emergency motion," he bellowed, silencing the panicked executives. "Effective immediately, we must sever all corporate ties with Vincent Tran and Derek Tran. We need to formally initiate an internal forensic audit and cooperate fully with the imminent federal inquiry. If we do not distance Tran Capital from these two individuals right this second, the regulatory agencies will dismantle this entire firm by Friday morning." "I second the motion," yelled a partner from the far side of the table. A chorus of aggressive agreements echoed off the glass walls. I watched the collapse unfold from the front of the room, standing completely still beside the projector. Derek was practically hyperventilating. The golden boy, the chosen heir who had smirked at me across this very table, was reduced to a stuttering, incoherent mess. He leaned heavily against the back of his tipped-over chair, grasping his chest as if he could not pull enough oxygen into his lungs. The heavy gold Rolex on his wrist slipped down his sweaty arm. He tried to articulate a defense, but his mouth only produced fragmented, desperate syllables. "I did not steal it," Derek gasped, his eyes darting wildly around the room. "I was trying to secure a bridge loan. The market was supposed to rebound. It was just a temporary reallocation of resources." Nobody was listening to him. The executives looked at my brother with profound disgust, viewing him not as a financial prodigy, but as a toxic liability they needed to amputate immediately. The brilliant facade he had worn his entire life had been violently stripped away, leaving a terrified, incompetent boy staring at the devastating consequences of his own boundless arrogance. Vincent stood near the acrylic podium, completely isolated in a room he had controlled with an iron fist for 30 years. He looked around the boardroom, his eyes wide and frantic, searching for a single loyal face among his most trusted partners. He found none. The men who used to hang on his every word now looked at him with sheer contempt. His patriarchal authority, the unquestioned power he wielded to elevate his son and crush his daughter, was an illusion maintained solely by the promise of continuous profit. Once the profit was exposed as a fabricated lie, his absolute power vanished. It evaporated into nothingness in less than 10 minutes. My father had spent his entire life building a rigid hierarchy based on optics and gender. He believed strength was loud, aggressive, and masculine. He believed my quiet diligence was an undeniable sign of weakness. Yet standing in the ruins of his empire, he finally understood the fatal flaw in his grand design. The loud, aggressive son had driven the car straight off a cliff. The quiet, invisible daughter had held the map the entire time. The vote to sever ties was imminent. The executives were preparing to officially cast my father and brother into the fire. The Securities and Exchange Commission would receive the unredacted logs, and the criminal justice system would take over. But as I looked at the broken men standing before me, a new, unforeseen complication arose in my mind. I held the absolute power to destroy them completely, to let the federal government lock them in a concrete cage for the next decade. But doing so would also mean watching the firm my grandfather built endure a catastrophic, highly publicized trial. A prolonged federal investigation would destroy the innocent employees who relied on these paychecks to feed their families. The fallout was no longer just about serving a bitter plate of revenge. It was about controlling the blast radius of their failure. I had to make a choice about what kind of leader I was truly going to be. The silver-haired managing director officially called for a 15-minute emergency recess to allow the board members to consult with their respective legal teams. The executives scrambled out of the boardroom, rushing toward quiet corners and private suites to coordinate their crisis strategies. I remained standing near the projector for a moment, unplugging my tablet and securing the encrypted flash drive back into my blazer pocket. I took a deep, steadying breath. The initial detonation was over. Now I had to manage the fallout. I walked out of the heavy glass doors into the main hallway. The normally bustling executive corridor was eerily deserted. The administrative staff had sensed the impending disaster and wisely retreated to their desks. I headed toward the private elevator bank, needing a few minutes of silence before returning to the war room to finalize the terms of my ascension. Before I could press the polished steel call button, two figures intercepted me. My parents moved with a frantic, uncoordinated energy entirely alien to their usual refined grace. Vincent looked disheveled. His expensive Italian silk tie hung loose around his collar, and sweat beaded on his forehead. Patricia trailed closely behind him, her pristine white tailored suit serving as a stark contrast to the absolute terror etched across her face. Gwen Vincent gasped, cutting off my path to the elevator. He reached out as if to grab my arm, but thought better of it, his hand hovering awkwardly in the space between us. You have to stop this. You have to recall those hard copy logs before the board submits them to the regulatory agencies. I looked at the man who had spent my entire life convincing me I was inherently inferior. He was not demanding obedience anymore. He was begging for mercy. I cannot recall physical evidence. Dad, I replied, my voice steady, devoid of the frantic energy consuming him. The board has the data. The federal banking alarms are already ringing in Washington. The fire is burning. Patricia pushed past my father, closing the distance between us. The haughty, condescending society matriarch who had handed me a cheap daily planner at a French bistro was entirely gone. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and tears streamed down her perfectly contoured cheeks, ruining her expensive makeup. "Gwen, please," Patricia wept, her voice cracking with genuine, desperate panic. "He is your brother. We are family. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to a federal penitentiary. It will destroy us. It will ruin our name forever. I stared at her, feeling a profound, terrifying sense of clarity. The emotional manipulation that used to paralyze me felt completely hollow. You are family, I repeated, letting the words hang in the quiet corridor. When Derek was stealing my work and presenting it as his own at the Plaza Hotel, were we family then? When you told me I was useless and better suited for the background, were we family then? You did not protect me when I had absolutely nothing. You only remembered we were family when you realized I held the power to destroy you. Patricia choked on a sob, pressing her manicured hands to her face. She tried to formulate a defense, an excuse to bridge the chasm she had spent decades digging, but the undeniable truth of her cruelty silenced her. Vincent took a step forward. He looked frantically down the empty hallway, ensuring no executives were lingering nearby to witness his utter humiliation. Then, the proud, imposing Chief Executive Officer of Tran Capital Group did something I never thought possible. His knees buckled. He dropped onto the thick imported carpet right in front of the elevator doors. "Gwen, I am begging you," Vincent pleaded, looking up at me from the floor. He clasped his hands together in a gesture of absolute surrender. I was wrong. I was arrogant and I was blind, and I am so deeply sorry for how I treated you. Just give us a chance to fix this quietly. Let Derek and me resign today. We will step down, issue a public statement about pursuing other ventures, and take a standard severance package. We will leave the city. You can have the entire company just as your grandfather intended. Just please, do not let the board forward that dossier to the Securities and Exchange Commission. I looked down at my father kneeling on the floor. I felt no triumphant thrill. I felt no vindictive joy. I only felt a deep, resonant sadness for a man who valued a toxic illusion over the brilliant daughter standing right in front of him. He was not apologizing because he suddenly realized my worth. He was apologizing because he had lost the game. If I had never found the Cayman logs, if I had never built a multi-million-dollar empire in the mountains, he would still be sitting in his corner office, pouring 12-year-old scotch and laughing at my discounted blazers. A quiet resignation with a golden parachute is a privilege reserved for leaders who simply mismanage a portfolio, I said, looking directly into my father's desperate eyes. Derek did not mismanage assets. He committed wire fraud. He stole $20 million to fund a failing tech startup, while you forged a medical directive to silence your own father. Those are federal crimes. Vincent closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping in total defeat. He knew the legal reality. He was just praying I still harbored enough desperate, pathetic love to save him from it. I am not seeking revenge, I continued, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet corridor. Revenge would have been releasing this data directly to the financial press and watching you burn on national television. What is happening inside that boardroom right now is not revenge. It is accountability. It is the direct consequence of your own choices. I stepped around my kneeling father and pressed the call button for the elevator. The silver doors slid open with a soft chime. "We have 5 minutes before the recess ends," I stated, not looking back at them. "You can return to the boardroom and face the executives, or you can run. The outcome will remain exactly the same." I stepped into the elevator car, the doors sliding shut, leaving my parents weeping in the hallway. The brief moment of solitude allowed me to prepare for the final negotiation. The board was terrified of the impending federal investigation. They were eager to amputate the infection, but a prolonged public trial would still severely damage the firm's reputation and potentially trigger a massive loss of client confidence. I needed to leverage their fear to secure absolute control over the transition. When the silver doors opened on the executive floor, I walked back toward the mahogany boardroom. The frantic shouting had died down, replaced by grim, tense negotiations. The executives were seated in their chairs, surrounded by legal pads and mobile phones, waiting for the executioner to return. I took my place at the head of the table, standing where my father had stood just an hour ago. The silence was immediate and absolute. 20 seasoned financial veterans looked at me, waiting for my command. I had stripped away the golden illusion. I had exposed the rot. Now I had to decide the exact terms of their surrender. I had the power to dictate the future of Tran Capital Group, and I was going to ensure the foundation was rebuilt on my terms entirely. I stepped back into the boardroom, closing the heavy oak doors behind me. The chaotic shouting had ceased. The 20 senior executives were sitting in their leather chairs in profound silence. They looked like men who had just survived a shipwreck, clinging to the wreckage, waiting for a rescue boat. The silver-haired managing director wiped his brow with a linen handkerchief. Another partner stared blankly at the projected screen, which still displayed the damning transaction logs. I walked past the empty visitor gallery where Madison had abandoned her diamond ring. The platinum band still rested on the mahogany surface, catching the harsh fluorescent light. It was a stark reminder of the fragile illusions that had governed this empire for decades. I took my place at the head of the table. I did not stand behind the acrylic podium my father had used to spin his fairy tales. I stood directly over the physical evidence, resting my hands on the cool, polished wood. Every eye in the room focused on me. For my entire life, I had craved this exact level of attention from these exact people. I had worked 80-hour weeks and swallowed countless humiliations just to earn a fraction of their respect. Yet standing in the center of their undivided focus, I felt no rush of vindication. I felt the heavy, sobering weight of leadership. I had the undeniable power to burn my father and brother to the ground. I could instruct the corporate counsel to forward my red binder to the Securities and Exchange Commission, ensuring a prolonged, highly publicized federal trial. The media would devour the scandal. The Tran family name would become synonymous with greed and catastrophic failure. But a federal indictment is not a precise weapon. It is a cluster bomb. If I dropped that dossier on a federal prosecutor desk, the regulatory agencies would freeze every asset attached to this firm. The resulting panic would trigger a run on our portfolios. Clients would pull their capital within hours. Tran Capital would collapse, taking hundreds of innocent employees down with it. The junior analysts, the administrative assistants, the custodial staff, the people who actually kept the lights on and the servers running, would lose their pensions and their livelihoods. They did not forge medical directives or embezzle $20 million. They did not deserve to suffer for the sins of a patriarch and his spoiled heir. I remembered my grandfather sitting in the freezing wind on the Plaza Hotel balcony, telling me that a parasite only survives if the host lets it feed. Burning the nest did not mean burning the entire tree along with it. It meant excising the rot with surgical precision. We are not going to forward this specific dossier to the federal authorities, I announced, my voice carrying clear and steady across the room. The collective exhale from the 20 executives sounded like a sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. The silver-haired director leaned forward, his tense posture relaxing by a fraction. "You are suggesting an internal containment strategy?" he asked, his tone laced with cautious relief. "I am mandating a targeted amputation," I corrected him. "The preliminary regulatory inquiry has already begun, and we will cooperate with standard audit protocols. We will settle the fines and pay the penalties, but we will not hand them a wrapped gift containing criminal wire fraud convictions. We will handle the perpetrators internally." I looked around the table, ensuring every partner understood the uncompromising nature of my terms. Vincent and Derek Tran are to be terminated immediately, I stated. They will be fired for cause. There will be no elegant press releases citing a desire to spend more time with family. There will be no golden parachutes. They will forfeit all executive severance packages, and their vested stock options are hereby revoked. The corporate counsel scribbled frantically on his yellow legal pad, documenting the ruthless corporate execution. Furthermore, I continued my gaze sweeping over the silent room. They created a $20 million hole in our core assets. They will fill it. They must surrender all personal properties tied to the firm until the ledger is balanced. Derek will sign over the deed to the Tribeca loft. He will liquidate the Hamptons property accounts. Vincent will drain his private reserve funds. They will sign ironclad, non-disclosure, and non-compete agreements. If they speak a single word to the financial press, or if they attempt to secure employment at any rival institution, we will release these Cayman logs to the Department of Justice. We hold the sword over their heads. They will spend the rest of their lives knowing their freedom depends entirely on their silence. The terms were severe, stripping two arrogant men of their wealth, their status, and their futures. But for the executives sitting at the table, it was a miraculous lifeline. It offered a clean break, a way to purge the liability without inviting a federal raid. The silver-haired director did not hesitate. He raised his hand high into the air. I call for an immediate vote on the proposed terms of termination and asset seizure, he declared. 19 other hands shot up into the air without a single second of hesitation. It was a unanimous, undeniable verdict. The men who had spent years kissing my father ring were now voting to strip him of his kingdom. Send them in, I instructed the lead attorney. The doors opened, and Vincent and Derek were escorted back into the boardroom. They were flanked by 4 towering corporate security guards. The imposing guards did not wear the polite smiles usually reserved for the executive floor. Their expressions were hard, their hands resting near their utility belts. They formed an impenetrable wall between the disgraced executives and the men they had tried to swindle. My father looked at the raised hands of his former partners. His shoulders slumped. The final ounce of fight drained from his body. He understood that his reign was officially over. Derek stood beside him, trembling visibly. The bespoke charcoal suit he wore now looked oversized, hanging loosely on a frame that had shrunk under the crushing weight of reality. The security chief stepped forward, placing 2 flat, unassembled cardboard boxes onto the mahogany table. You have 10 minutes to clear your personal effects from your offices, the security chief said, his voice devoid of any warmth. You will be escorted off the premises. Your access badges are already deactivated. Derek stared at the cheap corrugated cardboard. It was the ultimate symbol of corporate disgrace. He reached out with a shaking hand to unfold the box. As he moved, the heavy gold Rolex slipped down his wrist, clinking sharply against the cardboard. The sound was pathetic. The watch that always ran 5 minutes late was now a fitting accessory for a man whose time had officially run out. Vincent did not look at me. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the carpet. He took his box turned around and walked out of the room surrounded by the guards. Derek followed closely behind him, his head bowed, his arrogant smirk erased forever. The kings who had walked into the building that morning were being marched out like common criminals, carrying their hollow legacies in generic brown paper. I waited until the doors clicked shut. The silence returned, but this time it was not suffocating. It felt clear. It felt clean. I walked around the edge of the mahogany table. I approached the heavy leather executive chair that sat at the head of the room. It was the seat my father had occupied for 3 decades. I turned around and sat down. The leather was cool and firm. I ran my fingers along the armrests. The seat of power is a strange thing. It does not grant you wisdom. It merely amplifies whoever you already are. My father sat here and amplified his ego. I planned to sit here and amplify the truth. The 20 senior partners remained in their seats watching me with a mixture of awe and profound respect. I folded my hands, resting them on the polished wood. I had not just shattered the glass ceiling. I had dismantled the entire building and rebuilt it on my own foundation. I was ready to lead. But my new empire still had one final piece of unfinished business waiting to be resolved in the mountains. 6 months have passed since the day the heavy oak doors closed on my father and his reign. The 50th floor of Tran Capital Group looks entirely different now. I did not just assume the title of Chief Executive Officer. I fundamentally restructured the architecture of the environment. I had the monolithic marble slab removed from the corner office. It felt too much like an altar designed for sacrifices. In its place, I brought in a massive functional drafting table made of reclaimed oak. I do not sit behind an imposing fortress anymore. I work in the open, analyzing the data leading from the front lines. The suffocating atmosphere that used to choke the executive corridors has evaporated. The culture of loud arrogance and reckless gambles is dead. We operate on precision transparency and verified analytics. Naomi now occupies the office next to mine. I promoted her to Vice President of Risk Management. She no longer hides her brilliance in the shadows of the break room. She commands the trading floors, wielding her oversized glasses and undeniable intellect like a sword. Under our combined leadership, the tech portfolio did not just recover from the $20 million deficit. It thrived. We rebuilt the trust of our investors, not with charismatic fairy tales, but with relentless, bulletproof mathematics. As for the former monarchs of the Tran family, their exile was swift and absolute. High society in New York City is a ruthless ecosystem. It only tolerates arrogance when it is backed by liquid capital. The moment the financial district realized Vincent had been forcefully ejected from his own empire, the social invitations vanished overnight. Patricia and her pristine white tailored suits lost all their power. The exclusive charity luncheons stopped returning her calls. The country clubs quietly revoked their memberships. Without the corporate expense accounts to fund their illusions, they were forced to face the harsh reality of their depleted personal reserves. They sold the sprawling Westchester estate to cover the initial restitution payments and avoid total bankruptcy. They downsized to a modest 2-bedroom condominium in a quiet suburb of New Jersey. I received a brief voicemail from my mother a few weeks ago. Her voice lacked the dripping, artificial sweetness it once held. She sounded tired, hollow, and remarkably ordinary. She asked if I might consider reinstating a small monthly stipend for them. I did not return the call. A boundary is not a real boundary if you allow the people who broke you to keep asking for keys to the gates. But the most profound shift occurred with my brother. Derek avoided a federal prison sentence because I kept the red binder locked in my personal safe. But freedom comes with a severe price, and I made certain he paid every single cent. He surrendered the Tribeca loft, the luxury vehicles, and every liquidated asset he possessed to help patch the gaping hole he tore into our core funds. Madison and her lawyers finalized her departure quickly, taking the last remnants of his glossy social media existence with her. To repay the remaining millions he embezzled, Derek was forced to accept the terms of my restitution contract. He now works for Apex Data, the boutique risk management firm I built in the Adirondacks. He does not hold a vice president title. He is not allowed to speak to clients, pitch strategies, or make a single executive decision. He is an entry-level data entry clerk. His daily responsibilities consist of sitting in a small, windowless cubicle, manually inputting raw compliance logs into the verification software. He reports directly to Naomi, who reviews his keystrokes with zero tolerance for errors. Derek lives in a cramped, noisy apartment on the outskirts of Albany, sharing a single bathroom with 2 college students. He rides a public bus to the office every morning, and the true poetic justice, the detail that ensures the lesson is never forgotten, is his compensation package. Derek earns exactly $75,000 a year. He is currently living the exact life he once deemed beneath him. He is experiencing the grueling, exhausting reality of the invisible worker. I do not feel a sense of malicious joy when I review his employment files. I simply feel a profound sense of balance. The universe has a unique way of forcing you to walk the miles you previously forced others to endure. I split my time now between the Manhattan skyscraper and my cabin in the upstate mountains. The freezing winter snow has melted, giving way to the vibrant, lush green of summer in the Adirondacks. I was sitting on my wooden deck last Sunday, drinking black coffee, listening to the gentle lap of the glacial lake against the shoreline. The heavy crunch of tires on gravel announced the arrival of a familiar black Lincoln town car. My grandfather, Theodore, stepped out into the crisp mountain air. He visits me every other weekend. He leaves his silver cane in the trunk more often than not. The burden of pretending to be weak has lifted from his shoulders, taking a decade off his true age. We sat together on the deck watching a pair of hawks circle the tall pine trees. Theodore looked out over the pristine water, breathing in the scent of cedar and damp earth. He turned to me, his sharp eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine, unrestrained pride. "The oak tree back at the estate is healing," he told me, his voice carrying a quiet warmth I had never heard during my childhood. "The bark is growing back. The rot is gone." He reached out and placed his weathered hand over mine. He finally rests, knowing the empire he built from nothing is safe in the hands of the granddaughter who proved she could do exactly the same. I am looking out at the sprawling expanse of the New York skyline as I tell you this. I am 29 years old. I hold the controlling power of a financial dynasty. I sleep deeply through the night, unbothered by the ghosts of my past. I survived the toxic illusions of my family, and I emerged with my integrity entirely intact. If you are watching this and you recognize the pain in my story, I want you to listen to me very carefully. If you are the overlooked child in your family, if you are the one sitting near the loud printers working 80-hour weeks in the shadows while someone else steals the applause, if you are constantly handed cheap planners while the golden child receives heavy gold watches, do not wait for them to see your brilliance. They will never see it, because their vision is clouded by their own desperate need for control. Do not exhaust your beautiful, capable mind trying to balance a scale that was deliberately broken before you were even born. Stop pouring your clean water into their poisoned well. Pack up your intellect, step out of their suffocating shadow, and walk away. Go to the mountains. Go to a new city. Go anywhere that allows you to breathe. Take the raw materials of your resilience and build your own fortress. Your worth is not defined by the people who failed to recognize it. Your value is not determined by the chair they force you to sit in. You possess the power to engineer your own reality. You just have to be brave enough to strike the match and burn the nest. Build your own scale. Thank you for listening to my story. If this journey resonated with you, if you found a piece of your own strength in these words, please leave a comment below. Share your experiences. Let this community know they are not fighting their battles alone. Subscribe to Jessica Told Stories for more narratives about resilience, truth, and taking back your power. Until next time, stay strong, trust your own mind, and never let anyone tell you that you belong in the background. 6 months have passed since the day the heavy oak doors closed on my father in his reign. The 50th floor of Tran Capital Group looks entirely different now. I did not just assume the title of Chief Executive Officer. I fundamentally restructured the architecture of the environment. I had the monolithic marble slab removed from the corner office. It felt too much like an altar designed for sacrifices. In its place, I brought in a massive functional drafting table made of reclaimed oak. I do not sit behind an imposing fortress anymore. I work in the open, analyzing the data leading from the front lines. The suffocating atmosphere that used to choke the executive corridors has evaporated. The culture of loud arrogance and reckless gambles is dead. We operate on precision transparency and verified analytics. Naomi now occupies the office next to mine. I promoted her to Vice President of Risk Management. She no longer hides her brilliance in the shadows of the break room. She commands the trading floors, wielding her oversized glasses and undeniable intellect like a sword. Under our combined leadership, the tech portfolio did not just recover from the $20 million deficit, it thrived. We rebuilt the trust of our investors, not with charismatic fairy tales, but with relentless, bulletproof mathematics. As for the former monarchs of the Tran family, their exile was swift and absolute. High society in New York City is a ruthless ecosystem. It only tolerates arrogance when it is backed by liquid capital. The moment the financial district realized Vincent had been forcefully ejected from his own empire, the social invitations vanished overnight. Patricia and her pristine white tailored suits lost all their power. The exclusive charity luncheons stopped returning her calls. The country clubs quietly revoked their memberships. Without the corporate expense accounts to fund their illusions, they were forced to face the harsh reality of their depleted personal reserves. They sold the sprawling Westchester estate to cover the initial restitution payments and avoid total bankruptcy. They downsized to a modest 2-bedroom condominium in a quiet suburb of New Jersey. I received a brief voicemail from my mother a few weeks ago. Her voice lacked the dripping artificial sweetness it once held. She sounded tired, hollow, and remarkably ordinary. She asked if I might consider reinstating a small monthly stipend for them. I did not return the call. A boundary is not a real boundary if you allow the people who broke you to keep asking for keys to the gates. But the most profound shift occurred with my brother. Derek avoided a federal prison sentence because I kept the red binder locked in my personal safe. But freedom comes with a severe price, and I made certain he paid every single cent. He surrendered the Tribeca loft, the luxury vehicles, and every liquidated asset he possessed to help patch the gaping hole he tore into our core funds. Madison and her lawyers finalized her departure quickly, taking the last remnants of his glossy social media existence with her. To repay the remaining millions he embezzled, Derek was forced to accept the terms of my restitution contract. He now works for Apex Data, the boutique risk management firm I built in the Adirondacks. He does not hold a vice president title. He is not allowed to speak to clients, pitch strategies, or make a single executive decision. He is an entry-level data entry clerk. His daily responsibilities consist of sitting in a small, windowless cubicle, manually inputting raw compliance logs into the verification software. He reports directly to Naomi, who reviews his keystrokes with zero tolerance for errors. Derek lives in a cramped, noisy apartment on the outskirts of Albany, sharing a single bathroom with 2 college students. He rides a public bus to the office every morning. And the true poetic justice, the detail that ensures the lesson is never forgotten, is his compensation package. Derek earns exactly $75,000 a year. He is currently living the exact life he once deemed beneath him. He is experiencing the grueling, exhausting reality of the invisible worker. I do not feel a sense of malicious joy when I review his employment files. I simply feel a profound sense of balance. The universe has a unique way of forcing you to walk the miles you previously forced others to endure. I split my time now between the Manhattan skyscraper and my cabin in the upstate mountains. The freezing winter snow has melted, giving way to the vibrant, lush green of summer in the Adirondacks. I was sitting on my wooden deck last Sunday, drinking black coffee, listening to the gentle lap of the glacial lake against the shoreline. The heavy crunch of tires on gravel announced the arrival of a familiar black Lincoln town car. My grandfather, Theodore, stepped out into the crisp mountain air. He visits me every other weekend. He leaves his silver cane in the trunk more often than not. The burden of pretending to be weak has lifted from his shoulders, taking a decade off his true age. We sat together on the deck, watching a pair of hawks circle the tall pine trees. Theodore looked out over the pristine water, breathing in the scent of cedar and damp earth. He turned to me, his sharp eyes crinkling at the corners with genuine, unrestrained pride. "The oak tree back at the estate is healing," he told me, his voice carrying a quiet warmth I had never heard during my childhood. "The bark is growing back. The rot is gone." He reached out and placed his weathered hand over mine. He finally rests, knowing the empire he built from nothing is safe in the hands of the granddaughter who proved she could do exactly the same. I am looking out at the sprawling expanse of the New York skyline as I tell you this. I am 29 years old. I hold the controlling power of a financial dynasty. I sleep deeply through the night, unbothered by the ghosts of my past. I survived the toxic illusions of my family, and I emerged with my integrity entirely intact. If you are watching this and you recognize the pain in my story, I want you to listen to me very carefully. If you are the overlooked child in your family, if you are the one sitting near the loud printers working 80-hour weeks in the shadows while someone else steals the applause, if you are constantly handed cheap planners while the golden child receives heavy gold watches, do not wait for them to see your brilliance. They will never see it because their vision is clouded by their own desperate need for control. Do not exhaust your beautiful, capable mind trying to balance a scale that was deliberately broken before you were even born. Stop pouring your clean water into their poisoned well. Pack up your intellect, step out of their suffocating shadow, and walk away. Go to the mountains. Go to a new city. Go anywhere that allows you to breathe. Take the raw materials of your resilience and build your own fortress. Your worth is not defined by the people who failed to recognize it. Your value is not determined by the chair they force you to sit in. You possess the power to engineer your own reality. You just have to be brave enough to strike the match and burn the nest. Build your own scale. Thank you for listening to my story. If this journey resonated with you, if you found a piece of your own strength in these words, please leave a comment below. Share your experiences. Let this community know they are not fighting their battles alone. Subscribe to Jessica Told Stories for more narratives about resilience, truth, and taking back your power. Until next time, stay strong, trust your own mind, and never let anyone tell you that you belong in the background.